I am just a chronicler and welcome you to another video. Since I know many of you watch to relax and fall asleep, I thought it would be nice if you left a comment telling me where you're listening from and if it's raining there. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying the episodes. Now, it's time to get comfortable, relax, and begin. I should have known better than to trust my phone's GPS on these back roads. But it was late, I was tired, and that little blue line promised to shave an hour off my drive home. Now, as my headlights cut through the inky darkness, illuminating nothing but an endless ribbon of cracked asphalt, I'm starting to think I've made a terrible mistake. It started innocently enough. I was driving back from a business conference, my suit jacket tossed in the back seat and my tie loosened around my neck. The clock on my dashboard read 11:43 p.m. when I saw the notification pop up on my phone screen. Faster route available. Save 1 hour, 7 minutes. Hell yeah, I muttered, tapping accept without a second thought. The romantic in me even got a little excited. A midnight drive through the countryside sounded like the start of an adventure. The GPS guided me off the highway and onto a state road. No problem there. But then came another turn, and another, each road getting narrower. The yellow lines fading until they disappeared altogether. I should have turned back then, but the GPS kept insisting I was on the right track, and my eyelids were getting heavy. All I could think about was getting home to my own bed. That was, I don't know how long ago. An hour, 2. The clock on my dashboard is stuck at 12:17 a.m. The numbers glowing in eerie green in the darkness. My phone's no help either. No signal out here. I grip the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles white in the dim light. When was the last time I saw another car, or a house, or any sign of human life at all? The trees press in close on both sides of the road, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. It's fine, I say out loud, just to hear a human voice. You're fine. Just keep driving. You'll hit a main road eventually. But as the miles tick by, marked only by the hypnotic white dashes on the road, a creeping unease settles in my gut. Something's not right here. I've driven all over this state for work, and I've never seen a stretch of road this long without some sign of civilization. No mailboxes, no driveways, not even a damn billboard. I reach for the radio, desperate for some company, but all I get is static. I flip through the stations, hoping to catch even a snippet of a song or a DJ's voice, but there's nothing. Just that persistent white noise, like the road's gone audio. A glance at my fuel gauge sends a jolt of panic through me. The needle's dipping dangerously close to empty. How is that possible? I filled up right before I left the conference. Shit, I mutter, easing off the gas pedal. My headlights flicker, and for a heart-stopping moment, I'm plunged into total darkness. They come back on, but dimmer now, barely illuminating the road ahead. I lean forward, squinting into the night. There, in the distance, is that a light? My heart leaps. A gas station, maybe, or a house. Anything would be better than this endless road. I press down on the accelerator, watching the speedometer climb. 50, 60, 70 miles per hour. The trees whip by in a dark blur. But no matter how fast I go, that light never seems to get any closer. Come on, I growl through gritted teeth. Come on, the engine sputters, and a new light blinks to life on my dashboard. The dreaded check engine light. I ease off the gas, listening to the worrying noises coming from under the hood. No, 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 I plead. Not now. Please, not now. The car lurches, coughing like it's on its last legs. I guide it to the side of the road, gravel crunching under the tires as I rolled to a stop. The engine gives one final wheeze before dying completely. For a moment, I just sit there, hands still on the wheel, staring out at the impenetrable darkness beyond my headlights. The silence is absolute. No crickets, no distant traffic, not even the wind in the trees. Just nothing. I fumble for my phone, but the screen remains stubbornly black. Dead battery, of course. Okay, I say, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. Okay. Think. What would Dad do? Dad? The thought of him sends a pang through my chest. He'd know what to do in this situation. He was always prepared for anything. Probably would have had a whole emergency kit in the trunk. The trunk. Maybe there's something useful back there. I pop the trunk and step out of the car, immediately hit by a wall of humid air. It's unnaturally warm for this time of night, the kind of heavy stillness that comes before a storm. I shrug off my suit jacket, tossing it back into the car before making my way to the rear of the vehicle. The trunk creaks open, and I rummage through the clutter. A half-empty case of water bottles, an old blanket, a flashlight that flickers weakly when I click it on. Not exactly the survival kit I was hoping for, but it'll have to do. I grab the flashlight and a bottle of water, then slam the trunk shut. The sound echoes in the silence, seeming to go on far longer than it should. I spin around, half expecting to see something. Someone standing there in the road. But there's nothing. Just that same stretch of asphalt, disappearing into the darkness. I take a long drink of water, trying to calm my nerves. All right, I say, wiping my mouth with the back of my hand. Time to find that light. I start walking, the beam of my flashlight bobbing ahead of me. The asphalt is warm under my dress shoes, still holding on to the heat of the day. How long have I been driving? It feels like it should be close to dawn, but the sky remains an impenetrable black. As I walk, I start to notice things, little details that don't quite add up. The white lines on the road are too crisp, too perfect. No fading, no wear and tear. The trees on either side are identical, their branches forming the same patterns over and over again. It's like I'm walking through some kind of digital rendering, a video game landscape that hasn't fully loaded. Hello, I call out, my voice sounding thin and reedy in the still air. Is anyone out there? No response. Not even an echo. I've lost sight of my car now, the darkness swallowing it up behind me. But that light is still there in the distance, a beacon of hope, or maybe a mirage. At this point, I'm not sure which would be worse. The road stretches on, endless and unchanging. My feet ache in my dress shoes, clearly not made for this kind of trek. I loosen my tie further, then give up and pull it off entirely, stuffing it in my pocket. Time becomes meaningless. I could have been walking for minutes or hours. The only constant is the road beneath my feet and that damn light on the horizon. I'm so focused on putting one foot in front of the other that I almost miss it. A sign, half hidden by the overgrown brush on the side of the road. I swing my flashlight towards it, my heart pounding. Welcome to rest is obscured by rust and vegetation. I step closer, reaching out to brush away some of the leaves. A twig snaps somewhere in the woods behind me. I whirl around, the flashlight beam cutting through the trees. Who's there? My voice cracks, betraying my fear. Silence. Then another snap, closer this time. This isn't funny. I shout, backing away from the tree line. Show yourself. Something moves in the shadows, just beyond the reach of my light. Something big. I catch a glimpse of pale skin, unnaturally long limbs. I run, My dress shoes slap against the asphalt as I sprint down the road, not daring to look back. The light is still there, tantalizingly close now. If I can just reach it. A low moan rises behind me, a sound no human throat could make. It's joined by another, then another, a chorus of otherworldly voices that send chills down my spine. I push myself harder, my lungs burning, my legs screaming in protest. The light grows brighter, filling my vision. Almost there. Almost. I burst through some invisible barrier, and suddenly the world changes. The oppressive darkness lifts, replaced by the soft glow of pre-dawn. Trees give way to buildings, the endless road becoming a normal street with sidewalks and streetlights. I stumble to a stop, gasping for breath, and turn around. Where there should be some eldritch horror chasing me, there's nothing but a normal stretch of highway, early morning traffic starting to build. A car honks as it passes, the driver giving me a strange look. I must be quite a sight. Disheveled, tie missing, wild-eyed and panting on the side of the road. I look down at my watch. 6:43 a.m. Somehow, the entire night has passed. With shaking hands, I pull out my phone. It springs to life, suddenly full of missed calls and text messages. I have signal again. I'm back in the world. But as I stand there, cars rushing by and the sun peeking over the horizon, I can't shake the feeling that something's watching me. I turn, looking back the way I came. For just a moment, I swear I see it. A flicker of that endless dark road, a pale shape moving in the shadows. Then it's gone, leaving me to wonder if any of it was real at all. I flag down a taxi, giving the driver my home address. As we pull away, I can't help but look back one more time. The highway stretches out behind us, normal and innocent in the morning light. But I know the truth now. Somewhere out there, hidden from sight, there's another road. A forgotten highway that doesn't appear on any map. And God help anyone who finds themselves on it after dark. Story 2. I never meant to become a voyeur. It started innocently enough. A flicker of movement, a shadow passing behind perpetually drawn curtains. But now, as I sit in the dark, my eyes glued to the sliver of light across the street. I wonder if I've crossed a line I can't come back from. It was the kind of summer evening where the air hangs thick and heavy, like a wool blanket draped over the world. I was sprawled on my couch, fan worry uselessly nearby, when a moving truck rumbled down our quiet suburban street. New neighbors. I peered out my living room window, curious. A young couple emerged from a sedan parked behind the truck. She was petite, with long dark hair. He was tall and lanky. They looked normal, ordinary. I don't know what I was expecting, but their utter averageness was almost disappointing. Over the next few days, I caught glimpses of them unpacking, arranging furniture, settling in. But something odd stood out. Their curtains were always closed. Always. Even in the stifling heat of August, when everyone else on the block had their windows thrown wide open in a desperate bid for a breeze. Maybe they're just private people, my husband Tom shrugged when I mentioned it over dinner. Yeah, maybe, I agreed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. A week passed, then 2. I found myself spending more and more time by the window, watching their house. The curtains never opened, not even a crack. But sometimes, if I looked closely, I could see shadows moving behind them. Distorted shapes that didn't quite match the couple I'd seen on moving day. It was on a particularly restless night that I first saw it. I'd given up on sleep, the heat making my skin prickle uncomfortably. I padded downstairs for a glass of water, not bothering with the lights. As I passed the living room window, A flicker of movement caught my eye. There, in the neighbor's upstairs window, was a tiny gap in the curtains. Just the barest sliver of light. My heart raced as I crept closer, pressing my face against the cool glass of my own window. I could see into what looked like a bedroom. A figure moved inside, pacing back and forth. It was the woman. What was her name? Sarah? Sandra? I'd heard Tom chatting with them once, but I'd been too far away to catch the introductions. She looked distressed. Her hands kept running through her hair, tugging at it. Her mouth was moving, but I couldn't hear what she was saying. Was she arguing with someone? I strained my eyes, trying to see if her husband was in the room, but she seemed to be alone. Suddenly, she stopped pacing and turned to face the window. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought she'd seen me, but her gaze was unfocused, looking through me rather than at me. Then, without warning, she slammed her fist against the wall. Once, twice, 3 times. I flinched at each impact, even though I couldn't hear the sound. Just as abruptly as it had started, it was over. She turned away, disappearing from view. The curtain fell back into place, erasing all evidence of what I'd seen. I stood there for a long time, my forgotten glass of water sweating in my hand. What had I just witnessed? Should I do something? Call someone, but what would I say? I saw my neighbor having some kind of breakdown through a gap in her curtains that I definitely wasn't staring at in the middle of the night. I went back to bed, but sleep eluded me. The image of her face, contorted with some unnamed anguish, haunted me. The next morning, I half convinced myself I'd dreamed the whole thing. The neighbor's house looked as innocuous as ever, curtains drawn tight against the morning sun. I went about my day, working from home as usual, but I couldn't concentrate. My eyes kept drifting to the window, waiting for something. It became a nightly ritual. I'd wait until Tom was asleep, then creep downstairs to my vigil by the window. Most nights, nothing happened. But sometimes, oh sometimes, that little gap would appear. I saw fragments of their lives, like scenes from a silent movie. The husband pacing, gesticulating wildly as if giving a speech to an invisible audience. The wife curled up in a corner, rocking back and forth. Once, I saw them together, locked in what looked like a passionate embrace, until I realized his hands were around her throat. I should have called the police. I should have done something, anything. But each morning, I'd see them leave for work, looking perfectly normal. She'd wave to the neighbors, a bright smile on her face. He'd check the mail, exchange pleasantries with the postman. There was never a mark on her, never a sign of the violence I thought I'd witnessed. Was I imagining things? Projecting some hidden darkness onto this ordinary couple? Weeks passed. I grew pale and jumpy, dark circles forming under my eyes. Tom started giving me worried looks, asking if I was feeling all right. Just haven't been sleeping well, I'd mutter, avoiding his gaze. How could I explain what I'd been doing? He'd think I was crazy. Hell, maybe I was. It was a Tuesday night when everything changed. I was in my usual spot by the window, an untouched cup of tea gone cold beside me. The gap appeared in their curtain, wider than usual. I leaned forward, pulse quickening. The bedroom was empty, but as I watched, the door opened and the wife entered. She moved differently tonight, purposeful, almost predatory. In her hand was something long and gleaming, a knife. My breath caught in my throat. This was it, the moment I'd been waiting for, dreading. Proof that I wasn't crazy, that something sinister really was happening in that house. She stood by the bed, knife raised. I wanted to scream, to warn her husband, to do something, but I was frozen, a silent witness. Minutes ticked by. 5, 10, 15. She didn't move, didn't even seem to breathe, just stood there, poised like some terrible statue. Then, slowly, she turned and looked directly at me. A scream built in my throat as her eyes locked with mine. There was no doubt this time. She saw me. A slow, terrible smile spread across her face. She raised her free hand and beckoned to me, inviting me to join her. I scrambled away from the window, heart pounding. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be real. A knock at the door made me jump, a strangled yelp escaping my lips. "Honey?" Tom's voice, thick with sleep. "Are you okay?" I heard a noise. I couldn't answer. My eyes were fixed on the window, waiting for her to appear, waiting for that knife to come crashing through the glass. The door opened, and Tom's worried face appeared. "What's going on? You look like you've seen a ghost." I opened my mouth, but no words came out. How could I explain? He'd never believe me. Tom crossed the room, following my gaze to the window. "What are you looking at?" With trembling fingers, I pointed at the neighbor's house. "The curtain," I whispered. "Look at the gap in the curtain." He peered out, squinting in the darkness. "What gap?" "Honey, the curtains are closed. Just like they always are." "No," I shook my head vehemently. "No, I saw. She was there, with a knife. She saw me, Tom. She looked right at me. Concern etched deep lines in his face. He reached for me, but I flinched away. "I think you are having a nightmare," he said gently. "Come on, let's get you back to bed." It wasn't a nightmare. My voice rose, edging towards hysteria. "I've been watching them for weeks. I've seen things, Tom. Terrible things." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed quickly by alarm. "You've been watching them?" "For weeks, honey. That's not okay." I knew how it sounded. Knew the worried look he was giving me, like I was something fragile that might shatter at any moment. But I couldn't back down. Not now. Not after everything I'd seen. "You have to believe me," I pleaded. "Something's wrong in that house. We have to do something." Tom ran a hand through his hair, sighing deeply. Okay. We'll figure this out in the morning. But right now, you need to sleep. Please." I'll let him lead me upstairs, my legs shaky beneath me. But as we passed the bedroom window, I couldn't help but look out one last time. The neighbor's house stood silent and dark. No lights, no movement. No sign of the scene I'd witnessed. But there, in our driveway, gleaming in the moonlight, was a long kitchen knife. And pinned beneath it, a note with 2 simple words. "Your turn." Story 3. The crunch of gravel under our tires. Should have been the first warning sign. As we pulled into Whispering Pines campground, the silence hit me like a physical force. No kids laughing, no sizzle of campfires, not even the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Just nothing. "Wow, it's quiet, my wife," Cyril said, peering out the passenger window. "I guess we really did get away from it all, huh?" I forced a chuckle, trying to shake off the unease creeping up my spine. "Yeah, I guess so. The kids will change that soon enough." On cue, our 2 boys, Max and Jake, started clamoring in the back seats. "Are we there yet? Can we go swimming?" "I'm hungry." The familiar chaos was comforting, anchoring me in the face of this unsettling silence. I pulled up to the check-in booth, expecting to see a park ranger or at least an information board. Instead, there was just an empty wooden structure, a stack of maps, the only sign that anyone had ever been here. "That's weird," I muttered, reaching out to grab a map. "You'd think they'd have someone manning the booth." Sarah shrugged, already unfolding the campground layout. "Maybe they're understaffed. It's pretty remote out here." I nodded, not quite convinced. We'd booked this trip months ago, snagging one of the last available spots in what was supposed to be a packed campground. But as we drove to our assigned site, every campsite we passed was empty. No tents, no RVs, not a single soul in sight. "Mum, where is everyone?" Max asked, his earlier excitement dampening. "They're probably just out hiking, sweetie," Sarah replied, but I caught the uncertain glance she threw my way. We pulled into our spot, a nice clearing surrounded by towering pines. In any other circumstance, it would have been perfect. But now, with the unnatural quiet pressing in on us, it felt exposed, vulnerable. "All right, troops," I said, clapping my hands together with forced enthusiasm. "Let's get camp set up." The familiar routine of pitching tents and unloading gear helped ease some of my tension. The boys ran around, exploring our little patch of wilderness, their shouts echoing strangely in the still air. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, I finally allowed myself to relax a bit. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe everyone else was just running late, or had decided to do some night hiking. "Who wants hot dogs?" I called out, firing up our portable grill. Dinner was a jovial affair, with the boys recounting their discoveries. A weird-shaped rock, a hollowed-out log that might be home to a family of raccoons. Sarah and I exchanged relieved smiles over their heads. This was why we'd come out here, after all. To bond as a family, away from the distractions of modern life. As we roasted marshmallows for s'mores, Jake suddenly sat up straight, cocking his head to the side. "Did you hear that?" We all fell silent, straining our ears. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, faintly, I heard it too. Laughter, coming from somewhere in the woods. "See?" Sarah said, her relief palpable. "I told you there were other people here. They must just be at a different part of the campground." I nodded, but something still felt off. The laughter sounded distant, echoey, like it was coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Can we go see the other kids, Dad?" Max pleaded, already halfway out of his camp chair. "Not tonight, buddy," I said, ruffling his hair. "It's getting late. Maybe tomorrow we can explore a bit, okay?" He pouted, but didn't argue. Soon enough, the boys were yawning, sticky with marshmallow and chocolate. We tucked them into their sleeping bags in the tent, their excited whispers about tomorrow's adventures slowly fading into the rhythmic breathing of sleep. Sarah and I sat by the dying embers of our fire, the silence of the woods seeming to press in closer now that the boys were quiet. "John," she said softly, her hand finding mine in the darkness. "Is it just me, or is something weird about this place?" I squeezed her hand, grateful she'd voiced the concern I'd been trying to ignore all day. "Yeah," I admitted. "Yeah, something's definitely off." We sat there for a while longer, neither of us wanting to be the first to suggest going to bed. The laughter we'd heard earlier had faded away, leaving us alone with the crackling of the fire and the occasional hoot of an owl. Just as I was about to suggest we turn in, a flicker of light caught my eye. I sat up straighter, peering into the darkness. "What is it?" Sarah asked, following my gaze. I thought I saw. I trailed off as I saw it again. A flash of light between the trees, like someone moving with a flashlight. There, Sarah saw it too, this time. "Maybe it's a park ranger," she suggested, but her voice wavered with uncertainty. I stood up, grabbing our own flashlight. I'm going to check it out. John, no, Sarah protested, grabbing my arm. What if it's a bear or something? Bears don't carry flashlights, I pointed out, trying for a reassuring smile. I'll be careful, I promise. I just want to see if there's anyone else out there. She bit her lip, but nodded. Okay, but if you're not back in 10 minutes, I'm coming after you. I kissed her quickly, then set off into the woods, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The light I'd seen seemed to be coming from the direction of the other campsites. As I walked, the silence of the forest pressed in on me, broken only by the crunch of pine needles under my feet. I reached the next campsite over, expecting to find fellow campers setting up late. Instead, I found another empty clearing, devoid of any signs of life. But there, at the edge of my flashlight's beam, I caught another flicker of movement. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet night. "Is anyone there?" No response. Just another flash of light, further into the woods now. Against my better judgment, I pressed on. The rational part of my brain screamed at me to turn back, to return to the safety of our campsite. But something compelled me forward, a need to solve this mystery that had been nagging at me all day. I don't know how long I walked, chasing that elusive light. Time seemed to lose all meaning in the dark woods. But suddenly, I emerged into a large clearing, and there, arranged in a perfect circle, were dozens of tents and RVs. My heart leaped. Finally, the other campers. But as I approached, I realized something was wrong. The tents were all open, sleeping bags and personal belongings strewn about as if their occupants had left in a hurry. Campfires smoldered, long since burned out. "Hello," I called again, my voice cracking. "Is anyone here?" A twig snapped behind me. I whirled around, flashlight beam dancing wildly across the trees. And there, just for a moment, I saw them. Shapes moving in the darkness. Humanoid, but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin, limbs at impossible angles. I ran. Branches whipped at my face as I tore through the woods, blind panic driving me forward. I could hear them behind me, their eerie laughter echoing through the trees. The same laughter we'd heard earlier, I realized with a jolt of horror. I burst into our campsite, gasping for breath. Sarah was there in an instant, her face pale with worry. "John, what happened? What did you see?" I opened my mouth to answer, but no words came out. How could I explain what I'd seen? Would she even believe me? A noise from the boys' tent made us both jump. Max poked his head out, rubbing his eyes sleepily. "Dad, is everything okay?" I forced a smile, my heart still racing. "Everything's fine, buddy. Go back to sleep." He nodded and disappeared back into the tent. Sarah turned to me, her eyes wide with fear. "John," she whispered, "what do we do?" I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. "We leave. First thing in the morning, we pack up and we go." She nodded, relief flooding her face. Okay, good." We retreated to our tent, zipping it up tight as if that flimsy barrier could protect us from whatever was out there. As we lay in our sleeping bags, I strained my ears for any sound of approach. Just as exhaustion was finally starting to pull me under, I heard it. A whisper right outside our tent. "Your turn." I bolted upright, heart pounding. "Sarah," I hissed. "Sarah, wake up." But when I looked over at her sleeping bag, it was empty, unzipped, as if she'd just gotten up. With trembling hands, I unzipped the tent flap and peered out into the night. Our campsite was empty. No sign of Sarah, no sign of the boys. Just our equipment, arranged in a perfect circle. And there, scratched into the dirt in the center of our campsite, for simple words, "Welcome to the game." Story 4. The first time I saw him, I thought nothing of it. Just another face in the crowd, another suit-clad body pressed against mine in the cramped subway car. But then I saw him again, and again, and again. Always in the same spot, always staring, never speaking. That's when I knew something was terribly wrong. It started on a Monday, as most terrible things do. I was running late for work, hair still damp from my rushed shower, coffee sloshing dangerously close to the lid of my travel mug. I barely made it onto the 7:15 train, squeezing between closing doors with a muttered apology to no one in particular. As I caught my breath, I felt it. That prickle on the back of your neck when someone's watching you. I looked up, scanning the packed car, and that's when I saw him. He was tall, taller than most, with a shock of white blonde hair that stood out against his pale skin. But it was his eyes that caught me. Icy blue and utterly still, fixed on me with an intensity that made my stomach lurch. I quickly looked away, busying myself with my phone. Just a creep, I told myself. The city's full of them. Ignore him and he'll lose interest. But when I chanced another glance, he was still staring. His expression hadn't changed, hadn't even flickered. It was like looking at a photograph. The train lurched to a stop, and I gratefully fled, losing myself in the morning rush. By the time I got to my office, I'd almost forgotten about the strange man. Almost. The next morning, I was better prepared. I got to the station early, snagging a spot near the doors where I could keep an eye on everyone boarding. I told myself I was being silly, paranoid even. What were the chances I'd see him again? But as the train pulled away from the platform, there he was. Same spot, same stance, same unblinking stare. My heart rate picked up, thudding uncomfortably in my chest. I forced myself to look directly at him, to stare back. Maybe if I confronted him, he'd look away. But his gaze never wavered. It was like he was looking through me, into me. When my stop came, I all but ran off the train, glancing back just in time to see those icy eyes still fixed on me as the doors closed. This became our new routine. Every morning, no matter what time I took the train, no matter which car I chose, he was there. Always in the same crisp suit, always with that same unnerving stare. I started leaving for work earlier and earlier, hoping to avoid him, but it made no difference. He was always there, waiting. I tried changing up my route, taking buses or walking when I could. But on the days I couldn't avoid the subway, he was there without fail. It was like he knew my schedule better than I did. After 2 weeks of this, I was a nervous wreck. I wasn't sleeping, jumping at every sound, seeing that pale face and those piercing eyes every time I closed my own. My co-workers started to notice, shooting me concerned looks when they thought I wasn't paying attention. "You feeling okay, Jess?" My cubicle neighbor, Mark, asked one day. "You seem on edge lately." I forced a smile, knowing it probably looked more like a grimace. "Just not sleeping well," I lied. "You know how it is." He nodded sympathetically, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. I was falling apart, and everyone could see it. That night, I stayed late at the office, putting off my commute home as long as possible. The subway station was eerily quiet when I finally descended the stairs, my footsteps echoing off the tiled walls. As I waited for the train, I felt that familiar prickle on the back of my neck. I spun around, heart racing, but the platform was empty. Just me and the rats, I thought with a nervous chuckle. The train arrived with a screech of brakes, and I stepped on, relieved to find the car mostly empty. But as the doors began to close, a hand shot out, holding them open. My blood ran cold. I knew before I even looked up. It was him. He stepped onto the train with fluid grace, those icy eyes locked on mine. For the first time, I saw the hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. My legs felt like jelly, but I forced myself to stand my ground. Enough was enough. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking despite my best efforts. "Why are you following me?" He cocked his head to the side, regarding me with something like amusement. When he spoke, his voice was soft, almost gentle. "Oh, Jessica," he said, and the sound of my name on his lips sent a shiver down my spine. "I've been waiting so long for you to ask." He took a step towards me, and I instinctively backed up, bumping into the doors behind me. "Stay back," I warned, fumbling in my bag for my pepper spray. He raised his hands in a placating gesture, but kept moving forward. "I'm not here to hurt you, Jessica. I'm here to help you remember." "Remember what?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. His smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed just a little too sharp. "Everything." Suddenly, the lights in the car flickered, plunging us into momentary darkness. When they came back on, he was right in front of me, so close I could feel his breath on my face. I screamed, lashing out with my pepper spray, but my hand passed right through him like he was made of smoke. He laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, Jessica, still so afraid. When will you learn that you can't hurt me, that you can't escape me?" The train lurched to a stop, the doors behind me sliding open. I stumbled backward onto the platform, my eyes never leaving his face. But he didn't follow. He just stood there, watching me with that same unnerving smile as the doors closed between us. As the train pulled away, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window, and for just a moment, I saw his face superimposed over mine. I ran. I don't remember how I got home that night. The next thing I knew, I was in my apartment, all the lights on, every door and window locked. I called in sick to work the next day, and the day after that. I couldn't face the thought of getting on another train, of seeing him again. But as the days passed, a strange calm settled over me. The fear was still there, churning in my gut, but it was muted now, overshadowed by a growing sense of anticipation. It didn't make sense, but nothing had made sense since that first day I saw him. After a week, I knew I had to go back. I couldn't hide in my apartment forever. So on Monday morning, I found myself back at the subway station, heart pounding as I waited for the 7:15 train. The doors opened, and I stepped on, my eyes immediately searching for that shock of white blonde hair. But he wasn't there. The car was packed with the usual morning commuters, all studiously ignoring each other as they buried their noses in phones or books. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Maybe it was over. Maybe he'd moved on to terrorize someone else. But as I turned to find a handhold, I caught sight of my reflection in the window. And there he was, standing right behind me, that same enigmatic smile on his face. I whirled around, but there was no one there. Just a businessman giving me an odd look as he shifted away from my sudden movement. I looked back at the window, and he was gone. But now, everywhere I looked, I saw flashes of him. In the shine of a woman's glasses, in the reflective surface of a man's watch, in the black screen of a dormant phone. He was everywhere. He had always been everywhere. As the train pulled into the next station, I made a decision. I got off, but instead of heading up to the street, I walked to the end of the platform. There was a maintenance door there, usually locked, but today it swung open at my touch. I stepped through into darkness, the door swinging shut behind me with a final sounding click. I should have been terrified, but instead, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. "I'm here," I called out, my voice steady. "I'm ready to remember." A chuckle echoed through the darkness, and suddenly he was there, those icy blue eyes glowing in the gloom. "Finally," he said, reaching out a hand to me. "Welcome back, Jessica. We've missed you." As I took his hand, the world around me began to shift and change. The dank tunnel melted away, replaced by a vast, impossible space filled with swirling lights and strange geometries. And as my old reality faded, I remembered. I remembered who I was, who he was, what we were. I remembered everything, and I smiled, my eyes now as icy and blue as his, ready to find the next dreamer lost in the illusion we once called reality. Story 5. The first thing I noticed about Cedar Creek Cabin was the smell. As soon as we stepped out of the car, the scent of pine and wood smoke hit me like a physical force, making my CT-dulled senses reel. It was exactly what I'd hoped for when I booked this remote getaway for me and Sarah. A chance to disconnect, to breathe, to remember what real air smelled like. If only I'd known then that it would be the last pure moment of our vacation. "Oh, Alex, it's perfect," Sarah exclaimed, her face lit up with excitement as she took in the rustic cabin nestled among towering pines. I had to agree. With its weathered wood siding and cheerful red shutters, it looked like something straight out of a travel magazine. As we lugged our bags up the gravel path, the front door swung open, revealing a tall, lean man with a salt and pepper beard and deep-set eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "Welcome, welcome," he called out, bounding down the steps to meet us. "I'm Jack, your host. Let me help you with those bags." Before I could protest, he'd scooped up both our suitcases with surprising strength for a man who looked to be in his 60s. "Come on in, folks. Let me give you the grand tour." The interior of the cabin was just as charming as the outside, all knotty pine and cozy furnishings, with a massive stone fireplace dominating one wall. Jack showed us around with obvious pride, pointing out little details and sharing anecdotes about the cabin's history. "And here's the kitchen," he said, gesturing to a space that looked more suited to a high-end home than a rustic cabin. Fully stocked, of course. "I even left some of my famous chili in the fridge for you. An old family recipe." "Oh, that's so thoughtful," Sarah said. "But you didn't have to, nonsense." Jack cut her off, waving a hand dismissively. "It's my pleasure. I want you folks to feel right at home." As he continued the tour, I couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. Jack was friendly enough, but there was something off about him. His smile never quite reached those deep-set eyes, and he seemed to always be just a little too close, invading our personal space in a way that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "Well, I'll leave you two to get settled," Jack said finally, heading for the door. "But don't hesitate to holler if you need anything. I'm just down the path a ways." As soon as the door closed behind him, Sarah let out a long breath. "Wow, he's intense, huh?" I nodded, relieved that I wasn't the only one who'd noticed. "Yeah, a bit much. But hey, at least he's attentive, right?" We spent the rest of the afternoon unpacking and exploring the cabin and its surrounding woods. By the time evening rolled around, we were both pleasantly tired and more than ready for dinner. "Should we try Jack's chili?" Sarah asked, peering into the fridge. I hesitated. The idea of eating something prepared by our overly friendly host made me uncomfortable, but I couldn't think of a rational reason to refuse. Sure, why not? The chili was unusual. Not bad, exactly, but with a complex blend of spices that neither of us could quite place. We were about halfway through our bowls when a knock at the door made us both jump. Hello, hello, Jack's voice called out. Just wanted to check in, make sure everything's to your liking. I opened the door to find Jack standing there, that same too wide smile on his face. Oh, I see you're enjoying the chili, he said, peering past me to the table. How do you like it? It's unique, I said diplomatically. Thanks again for leaving it for us. My pleasure, Jack said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Say, I just remembered. I forgot to show you how to work the hot tub. Why don't I give you a quick demo? Before we could protest, he was leading us out to the back deck, chattering away about water temperatures and jet settings. I exchanged a look with Sarah, seeing my own discomfort mirrored in her eyes. It was fully dark by the time Jack finally left, with repeated assurances that he was just a shout away if we needed anything. As soon as he was gone, Sarah turned to me, her face pale in the moonlight. Alex, I don't like this, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Something's not right here. I pulled her close, trying to ignore the chill that ran down my spine. I know, babe, but it's just for a couple of days. We'll be fine. That night, I dreamed of Jack. In my dream, he was in our bedroom, standing at the foot of our bed, just watching. I woke with a start, heart pounding, to find the room empty. But as I lay there, trying to calm my racing pulse, I could have sworn I heard footsteps creaking on the porch outside. The next morning, we woke to find fresh muffins on the kitchen counter. Thought you might enjoy some breakfast. Read the note beside them in Jack's spidery handwriting. Don't be shy. There's plenty more where these came from. Okay, this is getting weird, I said, staring at the muffins like they might sprout legs and scuttle away. Did you hear him come in? Sarah shook her head, her face pale. Alex, I want to leave. This doesn't feel right. I nodded, relief flooding through me at her words. Yeah, let's pack up and go. We can find a hotel in town or something. But when we tried to leave, we found the road blocked by a fallen tree. Jack appeared as if by magic as we stood there, staring at the massive trunk. Oh dear, he said, shaking his head sadly. Must have come down in that windstorm last night. Don't you worry though. I've got a chainsaw back at my place. I'll have this cleared up in no time. That's okay, I said quickly. We can just call a tow truck or something. Jack's smile never wavered, but something flashed in his eyes that made my blood run cold. Now, he said, his voice taking on a steely edge. No need for all that. I insist. You folks just head on back to the cabin and relax. I'll take care of everything. We had no choice but to return to the cabin. As soon as we were inside, Sarah turned to me, her eyes wide with fear. Alex, we need to get out of here. Now, I nodded, already pulling out my phone. But there was no signal. Of course there wasn't. We were miles from the nearest town. Okay, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Okay, we'll hike out. It can't be that far to the main road. We threw some supplies into a backpack and slipped out the back door, plunging into the dense forest behind the cabin. But after what felt like hours of walking, the trees started to look familiar. Alex, Sarah said, her voice trembling. I think we're going in circles. A twig snapped behind us, and we both whirled around. There stood Jack, still wearing that unsettling smile. Now, he said, shaking his head like we were naughty children. There's no need for all this running around. Why don't we head back to the cabin? I've got a nice dinner planned. We had no choice but to follow him back. As we approached the cabin, I noticed something I hadn't before. Heavy curtains and all the windows drawn tight. Inside, the cabin had changed. The cozy furnishings were gone, replaced by sterile, hospital-like equipment. And on the walls... "Oh God," Sarah whispered, her hand clutching mine so tight it hurt. The walls were covered in photos. Photos of us. Sleeping, eating, showering. Every private moment of our stay captured in horrifying detail. "You see," Jack said conversationally, as if he were discussing the weather, "I've been waiting for the perfect guests. And you too. You're just right." He turned to us, that perpetual smile finally dropping away to reveal something cold and inhuman beneath. "Welcome home," he said. "You're going to be here for a very long time." As the reality of our situation sank in, I realized with dawning horror that the smell of pine and wood smoke that had so enchanted me upon our arrival wasn't coming from the forest at all. It was coming from the basement, where, I now understood, Jack kept the reminders of all his previous perfect guests. The last thing I heard before the world went dark was Sarah's scream, cut off abruptly as Jack hummed a cheery tune. "Now," he said, his voice fading as consciousness slipped away, "who's ready for dinner?" Story 6. The gentle hum of my computer was the only sound in the empty office as the clock ticked past 9 p.m. I rubbed my eyes, bleary from staring at spreadsheets for hours, and glanced around the deserted open-plan space. Rows of identical cubicles stretched out before me, bathed in the sickly glow of emergency lighting. I was alone, or so I thought. It was quarter in, and as usual, I'd volunteered to stay late to finalize the reports. "Good old reliable Mike," they'd say, patting me on the back as they rushed out to their lives beyond these bland beige walls. I didn't mind, really. The quiet after hours was when I did my best work, free from the constant chatter and ringing phones of the daytime. I stretched, my back popping in protest, and decided to take a quick break. The break room was on the other side of the floor, past the elevators and conference rooms. As I stood, the motion-activated lights flickered on, creating pools of fluorescent brightness in the sea of shadows. Halfway to the break room, a sound stopped me in my tracks. It was faint, barely audible over the building's ever-present HVAC system, but unmistakable. The tap-tap-tap of computer keys. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. "Anyone still here?" No response. Just that persistent tapping. I backtracked, peering into cubicles as I passed. All empty. The sound seemed to be coming from the far corner where the senior manager sat. As I approached, the tapping grew louder, more frantic. But when I rounded the corner, I found nothing. Just dark, silent computers and empty chairs. A chill ran down my spine. "Get it together, Mike," I muttered to myself. "You're letting your imagination run wild." I hurried to the break room, suddenly eager for the comforting normality of the vending machines and fluorescent lights. As I fumbled for change to buy a soda, I caught a glimpse of movement in the reflective surface of the machine, a shadow darting past the break room door. I spun around, heart pounding. The hallway was empty. "Hello," I called again, hating the tremor in my voice. "This isn't funny." "Who's there?" Silence. Then, from somewhere in the office beyond, came the sound of laughter. Not joyful or mirthful, but a low, sinister chuckle that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I abandoned my quest for a soda and hurried back to my desk, my footsteps echoing loudly in the empty space. I needed to finish my work and get out of here. The laughter had stopped, but now I could hear other sounds. Whispers just on the edge of hearing. The scrape of a chair being pushed back. Footsteps that seemed to follow me, but stopped whenever I did. Back at my desk, I tried to focus on my computer screen, but the numbers swam before my eyes. Every few seconds, I found myself glancing up, scanning the office for any sign of movement. The shadows seemed deeper now, the pools of light between them smaller and more isolated. A loud bang made me jump. It sounded like it came from the conference room down the hall. Against my better judgment, I got up to investigate. As I approached the room, I could see that the door was ajar, a sliver of darkness visible in the gap. I pushed the door open slowly, wincing at the creak of the hinges. The room was dark, the long table a pale shape in the gloom. As my eyes adjusted, I realized with a jolt that the chairs around the table weren't empty. Shadowy figures sat there, their features indistinct in the darkness. They seemed to be looking at me, waiting. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering in my chest. This wasn't possible. There was no one here. I was alone. I had to be alone. I ran back to my desk, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. I needed to leave. Now. I started gathering my things, shoving papers haphazardly into my bag. That's when I noticed my computer screen. Instead of the spreadsheet I'd been working on, it now displayed the feed from the building's security cameras. I hadn't opened this. I didn't even have access to this system. My eyes darted from one feed to another. Most showed empty hallways and offices, but then I saw it. A figure standing in the stairwell. As I watched, it turned to look directly at the camera. Its face was a blur, features shifting and changing like smoke. I looked away, my stomach churning. This couldn't be real. When I looked back, the security feed was gone, replaced by my familiar spreadsheet. "Okay," I said aloud, trying to steady my nerves. "Okay, Mike, you're tired. You're imagining things. Just pack up and go home." I finished shoving things in my bag and headed for the elevators, walking as quickly as I could without breaking into a run. As I passed the conference room, I couldn't help but glance inside. It was empty now, the chairs neatly pushed in around the table. The elevator seemed to take an eternity to arrive. When the doors finally slid open with a cheerful ding, I nearly sobbed with relief. I jabbed the button for the lobby repeatedly, willing the doors to close faster. Just as they were about to shut, a hand shot out, stopping them. My heart leaped into my throat as the doors slowly reopened. There was no one there. I backed into the corner of the elevator, my eyes darting wildly around the empty car. The doors closed, and I felt the familiar lurch as it began its descent. I was so focused on controlling my breathing that I almost missed it. The elevator was going down, yes, but it was going down past the lobby, past the parking garage levels, down 2 floors I didn't even know existed. The numbers on the display kept decreasing. B1, B2, B3. Lower and lower, well beyond where the building should end. My attempts to press other buttons, to stop the elevator's descent, were futile. The panel was unresponsive under my increasingly frantic tapping. Finally, with a jolt that nearly knocked me off my feet, the elevator stopped. The display read simply. The doors slid open with that same cheerful ding, revealing utter darkness beyond. For a long moment, I stood frozen, staring into that impenetrable black void. Then, slowly, shapes began to emerge from the darkness. Desks, cubicles, computer screens glowing with an eerie blue light. It was our office, but wrong, twisted. The proportions were off, the corners too sharp, the shadows too deep, and there were things moving between the desks. Shapes that were almost human, but not quite. One of them turned towards me, its face a flickering series of features I almost recognized. It smiled, revealing too many teeth. "Welcome back, Mike," it said, its voice a chorus of whispers. "We've been waiting for you to join us." I lunged for the elevator controls, desperately mashing buttons. To my immense relief, the doors began to close, just before they shut completely. I caught a glimpse of dozens of those not-quite human figures surging towards the elevator, their arms outstretched. The elevator shot upwards so quickly my stomach lurched. When it finally stopped, the doors opened onto the familiar lobby. I didn't wait to see if anything had followed me. I ran, bursting out of the building into the cool night air. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I glanced back at the building. All the windows were dark, except for one on my floor. There, barely visible, was a figure standing at the window, watching me leave. I never went back to that office. I sent an email resignation that very night and blocked all calls from my former workplace. Sometimes, on sleepless nights, I find myself wondering about that other office, the one below. I wonder if it's still there, those almost familiar figures going about their twisted version of a workday. And sometimes, when I'm working late at my new job, I catch myself listening for the sound of phantom keystrokes, or watching the shadows for movement. Because now I know the truth. The office after hours is never truly empty. And if you stay too late, you might just find yourself becoming a permanent part of the night shift. Story 7. The first drops of rain hit my face as I reached the summit of Mount Cascade. I squinted at the darkening sky, my triumph at conquering the peak quickly fading to concern. This wasn't the light afternoon shower the weather report had promised. "Shit," I muttered, turning to my hiking buddy, Ryan. "We should head back. This looks like it could get nasty," but Ryan wasn't there. My heart skipped a beat as I spun around, scanning the rocky outcropping. We'd been together just moments ago, hadn't we? I could have sworn he was right behind me as we made that final push to the top. "Ryan," I called out, my voice nearly lost in a sudden gust of wind. "Ryan, where are you, man?" Nothing. Just the whistle of wind through scraggly pines and the distant rumble of thunder. A crack of lightning illuminated the roiling clouds above, and I felt the first stirrings of real fear in my gut. I fumbled for my phone, cursing as I remembered there was no signal up here. We were miles from the nearest town, and the sun was setting fast. I had to find Ryan and get us both off this mountain before the storm hit in earnest. I started back down the trail we'd come up, my eyes darting left and right for any sign of my friend. "Ryan!" I shouted every few steps, straining to hear a response over the increasingly loud wind. The rain was coming down harder now, turning the dirt path into treacherous mud. I slipped more than once, my hands scrabbling for purchase on wet rocks and roots. The familiar trail suddenly seemed alien in the gathering gloom. Landmarks I'd noted on the way up now twisted into unrecognizable shapes by shadows and my own rising panic. A flash of color caught my eye. Ryan's red backpack, propped against a tree just off the trail. I rushed over, relief flooding through me. "Ryan, you here, buddy?" But the small clearing was empty. I picked up the backpack, frowning. Why would he leave this behind? It had our water, our first aid kit, our emergency supplies. A twig snapped behind me, and I whirled around. Ryan. For a split second, I thought I saw a figure standing between the trees. Tall, much taller than Ryan, with limbs that seemed too long, too thin. Then another flash of lightning, and it was gone. I backed away, my heart pounding. It was just a trick of the light, I told myself. Just shadows and fear playing tricks on your mind. "Help," Ryan's voice, coming from further down the mountain. I took off running, heedless of the slippery trail, Ryan's backpack clutched to my chest. "I'm coming," I yelled. Keep shouting, Ryan. I'm on my way. I ran for what felt like hours, following Ryan's cries for help. But something was wrong. His voice never seemed to get any closer, no matter how fast I ran. And there was something off about it, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I skidded to a stop, gasping for breath, straining my ears. There Ryan's voice again. But this time, I realized what was bothering me. It was coming from behind me, up the mountain. Exactly where I'd just come from. What the hell? I muttered, turning in a slow circle. This didn't make any sense. How could he be up there? Help me, please. My blood ran cold. That voice. It sounded like Ryan, yes, but there was something else underneath. Something that made my skin crawl. Against my better judgment, I started to climb back up the trail. The wind was howling now, driving the rain sideways into my face. I could barely see 3 feet in front of me. Ryan, I called out, hating the tremor in my voice. Ryan, where are you? Here, I'm here. Close, so close. I rounded a bend in the trail, and there he was. Ryan, standing in the middle of the path, his back to me. Relief washed over me, so intense it made my knees weak. Jesus, Ryan, you scared the hell out of me. Are you okay? What happened? He didn't turn around, didn't move at all. I took a step closer. Ryan, I'm here, he said again. But his voice was wrong, distorted, like it was coming from underwater. Or like something was wearing Ryan's voice, like an ill-fitting suit. I started to back away. Ryan, you're freaking me out, man. Let's just get off this mountain, okay? Slowly, so slowly, he began to turn. I caught a glimpse of his face and stumbled backward with a choked cry. It was Ryan's face, but twisted, elongated. His mouth was stretched in an impossibly wide grin, lips pulled back to reveal rows of needle-sharp teeth. And his eyes. His eyes were solid black, reflecting my own terrified face back at me. I'm here, Natrian said again, in that horrible, distorted voice. I've been waiting for you. I ran. Blind panic gave me speed I didn't know I possessed. I tore down the mountain, uncaring of the treacherous footing, of the branches that whipped at my face and tore at my clothes. Behind me, I could hear something crashing through the underbrush. Something big. Come back, Ryan's voice called, but layered now with other voices. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Men, women, children, all calling my name, all begging me to come back, to help them. I lost my footing on a slick rock and went down hard, tumbling head over heels down a steep incline. Pain exploded in my knee, in my ribs, but terror drove me back to my feet. I hobbled forward, each step agony, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The voices were all around me now, a cacophony of pleading and wailing. Hands seemed to grab at me from every shadow, icy fingers brushing my skin. I swatted them away, not sure if they were real or just my frantic imagination. I burst out of the tree line into a small clearing and froze. There, in the center of the clearing, was Ryan. The real Ryan. He was on his knees, head bowed, unnaturally still. Ryan, I whispered, taking a hesitant step forward. Ryan, is that really you? He looked up slowly, and I felt a flood of relief. It was him. No twisted features, no black eyes. Just my friend, looking scared and confused. What's going on? He asked, his voice shaking. I heard you calling, but I couldn't find you. There were things in the woods, chasing me. I hurried over to him, wincing at the pain in my knee. I don't know, man, But we need to get out of here now. I reached down to help him up. Our hands were inches apart when Ryan's face suddenly contorted, twisting into that terrible grin I'd seen before. His eyes went black, and his hand shot out, gripping my wrist with inhuman strength. "Got you," Natrian hissed, in that voice of many voices. I screamed, trying to pull away, but his grip was like iron. All around us, shapes were emerging from the woods. Humanoid, but wrong. Stretched and twisted parodies of people, all with those same black eyes, those same two wide grins. "You'll stay with us now," Natrian said, slowly pulling me down. "Forever." With a strength born of utter terror, I wrenched my arm free. I stumbled backward, nearly falling, and then I was running again. The clearing erupted with howls of rage and frustration, spurring me to even greater speed. I don't know how long I ran. Time lost all meaning in that nightmare flight down the mountain. Somehow, I found the main trail. Somehow, I made it to the ranger station at the base. The rangers found the real Ryan 2 days later, at the bottom of a ravine not far from the summit. They said he must have fallen, gotten disoriented in the storm. They called me lucky. Said if I'd stayed to look for him, I might have gotten lost too. Might have fallen. I nodded and agreed, and never told them what really happened on that mountain. Never told them about the voices, the shadows, the thing that wore my friend's face. They wouldn't have believed me anyway. But sometimes, on dark nights, when the wind howls outside my window, I swear I can hear them. Voices calling my name, begging me to come back, to help them. And I wonder, did I ever really make it off that mountain at all? Story 8. I first noticed him on a Tuesday. The gentle thud of letters hitting the hallway floor drew me to the window, where I caught a glimpse of a unfamiliar figure retreating down our front path. He moved with an odd, lurching gait, his mailbag swinging erratically at his side. This wasn't our usual carrier, jovial old Frank who'd been working this route since I was a kid. "Huh," I muttered to myself, "must be a temp." I didn't think much of it then. At 68, recently retired, and with not much to do besides tend to my garden and watch the neighborhood, I had plenty of time to notice such small changes. But as the week wore on, I found my attention repeatedly drawn to this new mailman. He was younger than Frank, probably in his 30s, with a pallid complexion that seemed at odds with a job spent mostly outdoors. But it was his eyes that unsettled me the most, dark, sunken things that darted about constantly, as if he were always looking for something, or away from something. I started timing my morning coffee to coincide with mail delivery, watching from behind my living room curtains as he made his way down our street. He lingered at each house far longer than seemed necessary, sometimes standing motionless at a mailbox for minutes at a time. On Friday, I decided to introduce myself. I was out front, ostensibly pruning my rose bushes, when he approached. "Morning," I called out, trying to sound cheerful. "You're new to the route, aren't you?" "I'm Harold." He turned those unsettling eyes on me, and I felt a chill run down my spine despite the warm spring sun. "Yes," he replied, his voice a dry rasp. "New. Very new." He thrust a bundle of letters at me without another word, then continued on his way, that same awkward gait carrying him to the next house. I stood there for a moment, slightly stunned by the encounter. As I flipped through the mail, a flash of white caught my eye. An envelope had slipped from the bundle and lay face down on the grass. I bent to retrieve it, my joints protesting the movement. My blood ran cold as I turned it over. It was addressed to me, but there was no stamp, no postmark, just my name and address in spidery, unsettling handwriting. With trembling fingers, I tore it open. Inside was a photograph of me, sleeping in my bed, taken from the doorway of my room. Last night's date was scrawled in the corner. I looked up sharply, but the street was empty. The mailman had vanished. That night, I double-checked every lock in the house, even dragging an old chair in front of my bedroom door. I tried to convince myself it was a prank, a sick joke played by bored teenagers. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that mailman's hollow gaze. Sleep came fitfully, broken by the slightest sound. The house settling, a car passing outside, the whisper of wind through the trees. Each noise had me sitting bolt upright, straining my ears for the creak of a floorboard or the rattle of a doorknob. Morning came, and with it, a fragile sense of normalcy. In the harsh light of day, my fears seemed overblown. I almost managed to convince myself I'd imagined the whole thing, until the mail arrived. This time, I didn't go out to meet him. I watched from the window as he lingered by my mailbox, his head cocked at an unnatural angle. When he finally moved on, I waited a full 5 minutes before venturing out. Another unmarked envelope, another photograph. This time, it was me at my kitchen table, taken through the window. This morning's newspaper was clearly visible, dating the image to just hours ago. My hands shook as I retreated inside, slamming and locking the door behind me. This was real. This was happening. I spent the rest of the day pacing, jumping at every sound. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? That my mailman was stalking me. That someone was breaking in to take photos while I slept. They'd think I was a senile old man, imagining things. As night fell, I found myself huddled in my armchair, all the lights blazing, a heavy flashlight clutched in my trembling hands. Every shadow seemed to move, every distant sound a potential threat. Sometime after midnight, I must have dozed off. I awoke with a start, momentarily disoriented. The house was silent, but something had woken me. A presence, perhaps. A change in the air. My eyes darted to the front door. There, silhouetted against the porch light, was a figure. Tall, thin, motionless. Watching, I blinked, and it was gone. Sleep was impossible after that. I spent the rest of the night with my back to the wall, flashlight trained on the door, waiting for dawn with desperate intensity. When the sun finally rose, I was almost giddy with relief. I staggered to the kitchen, my body aching from the long night of tension. As I waited for my coffee to brew, a movement in the backyard caught my eye. My neighbor, Ellen, was out hanging laundry. Sweet, matronly Ellenhood brought me casseroles when my Martha passed. But something was off. Her movements were jerky, uncoordinated. And when she turned, I saw her face. Her eyes were wrong, dark, sunken, like the mailman's. I stumbled back from the window, my heart pounding. This couldn't be happening. I had to be imagining things. The mail arrived early that day. I watched, my face pressed against the window, as the carrier made his way down the street. He stopped at each house for much longer than usual, and at each one, someone came out to meet him. Old Mr. Johnson from across the street, the young couple from the corner house, even little Timmy, who was always racing his bike up and down the sidewalk. They all moved wrong. They all had those eyes. When he reached my house, he stopped. Slowly, he turned his head to look directly at me. A smile spread across his face. 2 wide, revealing rows of sharp, yellowed teeth. I fled to my bedroom, barricading the door with every piece of furniture I could move. The thud of mail hitting the floor came soon after, followed by soft footsteps retreating down the path. It was hours before I worked up the courage to venture out. The envelope was there, of course. Inside, A photo of me at the window, taken moments before. But this time, there was a note. Soon, it read. You'll be joining us soon. The next few days passed in a haze of terror. I didn't leave the house, didn't answer the door no matter how much my neighbors knocked and called. Their voices sounded wrong now, distorted. Sometimes, in the quiet of the night, I could hear them whispering outside my windows. Each day, the mail came. Each day, a new photo showing me in moments I thought I was alone. Each day, the same note. Soon, I stopped sleeping, surviving on coffee and fear. My phone ran out of battery, and I was too afraid to plug it in, convinced that somehow they'd use it to get to me. The power flickered occasionally, plunging me into darkness where every shadow seemed to move. On the seventh day, I awoke to silence. No birds singing, no distant traffic, nothing. Gathering my courage, I approached the window. The street outside was empty, every house dark. But there, at each doorstep, stood a figure, waiting, watching my house. A thud from the hallway made me jump. The mail had arrived. With shaking hands, I opened the envelope. The photo inside was like all the others, me sleeping, taken some time during my exhausted, fear-fueled naps. But the note was different. It's time, it read. A knock at the door. Soft, almost gentle. Harold, a voice called. It sounded like Ellen, but wrong. Distorted. Harold, dear, won't you come out? We're all waiting for you. More voices joined in, a chorus of my neighbors, all calling my name. All wrong, join us, Harold, they chanted. Become one of us. The doorknob began to turn. I had never unlocked it, but it was opening anyway. As the door swung wide, revealing a sea of familiar faces with those terrible, dark eyes, I felt a strange calm settle over me. In that moment, I understood. This was always going to happen. From the moment that new mailman had appeared, this was inevitable. Hello, Harold, the mailman said, stepping forward. Are you ready for your new route? I looked down at my hands, watching as my skin grew pale, my fingers elongating. I felt my eyes sink into my skull, my vision sharpening, seeing things I'd never seen before. Yes, I heard myself say, my voice a dry rasp. I'm ready. As we walked down the street, our strange procession growing with each house, I felt a smile spread across my face. Too wide. Too many teeth. The mail, after all, must be delivered. Story 9. The moment I stepped into room 237, a wave of déjà vu washed over me. I froze in the doorway, my wheeled suitcase bumping against my legs as I tried to shake off the unsettling feeling. It was just another cookie-cutter hotel room, I told myself. Beige walls, generic artwork, the faint smell of industrial cleaner barely masking years of stale cigarette smoke. I'd stayed in 100 rooms just like this one, but as I wheeled my bag to the bed, my eyes were drawn to the nightstand. A dog-eared paperback lay there, its cover achingly familiar. The Catcher in the Rye, my favorite book. Huh? I muttered, picking it up. Weird coincidence. I flipped it open, half expecting to see my own name scrawled inside the cover. It was blank, of course. Just a forgotten novel left by a previous guest with similar taste in literature. Shrugging off my suit jacket, I set about unpacking. Another thrilling week of sales meetings in another forgettable Midwestern city. The life of a traveling salesman wasn't exactly glamorous, but it paid the bills. As I hung up my shirts, a scent caught my attention. Subtle, but distinct from the usual hotel smells. Lavender, my wife's favorite perfume. I paused, hanger in hand, and took a deep breath. There it was again, unmistakable. For a moment, I could almost imagine Sarah was here with me, instead of back home in Boston. "Get it together, Dan," I said aloud, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet room. "It's been a long day. You're imagining things." I finished unpacking and decided to grab dinner at the hotel bar. As I was leaving, I noticed something odd about the generic landscape painting above the bed. The scene, a serene lake surrounded by autumn trees, was one I'd seen 100 times in 100 hotel rooms. But something about this one nagged at me. The curve of the shoreline, the reflection of the trees in the still water. It looked exactly like the view from my family's lake house in New Hampshire. I shook my head, trying to clear it. I was letting my imagination run wild, seeing connections where there were none. I needed a drink and a good night's sleep. The bar was nearly empty. Just a couple of road-weary businessmen nursing whiskeys at opposite ends of the counter. I clinged a stool and ordered a beer, pulling out my phone to check my emails. "Anything else?" the bartender asked as he set down my drink. I glanced up, then did a double take. For a split second, I could have sworn the man behind the bar was my old college roommate, Mike. But no, this guy was older, his hair grayer, his face lined with wrinkles. Mike wouldn't have fought another 20 years. No, I stammered. "Thanks." The bartender nodded and moved away, leaving me to stare at my beer, my appetite suddenly gone. What the hell was going on? Was I losing my mind? I gulped down my drink and headed back to my room, suddenly eager for the oblivion of sleep. But as I approached room 237, I heard something that made me stop dead in my tracks. Music, faint but clear, drifting through the door. The melody was hauntingly familiar. Sarah's favorite song, the one we danced to at our wedding. My hand shook as I slid the keycard into the lock. The music cut off abruptly as I pushed open the door, replaced by the oppressive silence of an empty hotel room. I stood in the doorway, my heart pounding. The room looked exactly as I'd left it, but now everything seemed slightly off. The shadows were a little too deep, the corners a little too sharp, and that lavender scent was stronger now, almost overpowering. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I tossed and turned, plagued by vivid dreams that slipped away the moment I opened my eyes. Each time I woke, the room seemed different. Once, I could have sworn the armchair by the window was the same threadbare recliner from my childhood home. Another time, the bland hotel artwork had been replaced by a framed photo of Sarah and me on our honeymoon. But when I turned on the light, everything was back to normal. Just another bland hotel room. I was starting to question my own sanity. Morning brought no relief. As I stumbled to the bathroom, bleary-eyed and desperate for coffee, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the mirror. For a heart-stopping moment, I didn't recognize the face staring back at me. It was me, but older, much older. Deep wrinkles lined my face, my hair more gray than brown. I blinked, and my normal reflection returned. But the image of that aged version of myself lingered in my mind, refusing to fade. The day passed in a haze of meetings and presentations. I went through the motions, my mind constantly drifting back to room 237 and its increasingly unsettling familiarity. By the time I returned that evening, I was half convinced I'd imagined the whole thing. Stress and lack of sleep could do funny things to a person's mind, after all. But as soon as I opened the door, I knew something had changed. The room was different now, no longer even pretending to be a generic hotel space. It was my bedroom. Not the one from my current house in Boston, but my old room from my parents' house in Maine. Every detail was perfect. From the faded posters on the walls to the stack of comic books on the dresser. I backed out into the hallway, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. This wasn't possible. It couldn't be real. A door opened further down the corridor, and an elderly couple emerged. They looked at me with concern. "Are you all right, young man?" the woman asked, her voice kind. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I tried to speak, to ask them if they saw what I saw, but no words came out. The old man's brow furrowed. "Room 237A, he said, nodding at my open door. "Tricky one, that. Never know quite what you're gonna get in there." His wife swatted his arm. "Don't scare the poor boy, Harold. I'm sure it's a lovely room." They continued down the hall, leaving me staring after them in mute horror. What did he mean? Never know what you're gonna get. Did everyone experience this? This impossibility? Slowly, hesitantly, I re-entered the room. It was a hotel room again, bland and unremarkable. But now I noticed other things. A photo on the nightstand that hadn't been there before. Sarah and me, grey-haired and wrinkled, surrounded by grandchildren I didn't recognize. A pill organizer on the bathroom counter, filled with medications I didn't need. Reading glasses I'd never worn perched atop that copy of Catcher in the Rye. As I stood there, the room seemed to shimmer and shift. One moment it was my childhood bedroom, the next my first apartment in college. Then the master bedroom of a house I'd never seen but somehow knew was mine. Always mine, but at different points in a life I hadn't lived yet. The truth hit me like a physical blow. This room, it wasn't just a hotel room. It was every room I'd ever lived in, and every room I ever would. It was my past, my present, my future, all existing simultaneously in this impossible space. I sank onto the bed, my bed in every version of my life, as the room continued to shift and change around me. Moments from a lifetime I hadn't lived yet played out before my eyes. Birthdays, anniversaries, funerals, joy and pain, love and loss, all blending together in a dizzying kaleidoscope of experience. I don't know how long I sat there, watching my life unfold and refold, time losing all meaning in that impossible room. At some point, I must have fallen asleep, because I woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains. For a moment, I didn't know where or when I was. Then, reality reasserted itself. A hotel room. Just a normal, bland hotel room. As I packed my bags with shaking hands, I tried to convince myself it had all been a dream. A vivid, terrifying dream brought on by stress and too much late-night TV. But as I headed for the door, something caught my eye. There, on the nightstand, was a note. Written in my own handwriting, but aged, shaky. The handwriting of an old man. "Enjoy the journey," it read. "It goes by faster than you think." I left room 237 that day, but in a way, I never really checked out. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I can still feel it. That impossible room, existing somewhere beyond time and space, waiting for me, calling me back. And sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I catch a glimpse of that older version of myself. He's smiling, as if he knows a secret, as if he's lived it all before. Maybe he has. Maybe I have. In room 237, where past, present, and future collide, anything is possible. Story 10. The waiting room clock ticked away with maddening precision, each second stretching into eternity. I'd been sitting in this hard plastic chair for how long now? An hour? 2? The receptionist's reassuring smile was beginning to look strained around the edges. "The doctor will be with you shortly, Mr. Thompson," she said for what felt like the 100th time. "Just a bit longer." I nodded, trying to ignore the knot of unease growing in my stomach. This was supposed to be a routine checkup, but nothing about this felt routine anymore. It had started normally enough. I'd arrived at Dr. Patel's office at 2 p.m. sharp, signed in, and taken a seat. The waiting room had been busy then, full of the usual mix of coughing kids and elderly patients leafing through outdated magazines. But as the minutes ticked by, the room had slowly emptied. Patients were called back, one by one, but no one ever seemed to return. Now, I was alone, save for the receptionist behind her high counter. I checked my watch again, frowning. 4:37 p.m. This was getting ridiculous. "Excuse me?" I said, approaching the desk. "I'm sorry, but I've been waiting for over 2.5 hours. Are you sure the doctor hasn't forgotten about me?" The receptionist's smile never wavered, but something flickered in her eyes. Fear. "Oh no, Mr. Townsend. The doctor could never forget about you. You're a very special patient. Please, just a bit longer." I returned to my seat, that knot of unease tightening. Special patient. What did that mean? The clock ticked on. 5 p.m. came and went. Then 6. The sun outside the window began to set, casting long shadows across the empty waiting room. Still, the receptionist insisted I wait. "It won't be much longer now," she'd say, her smile growing more forced with each reassurance. By 7 p.m., I'd had enough. I stood, grabbing my jacket. "I'm sorry, but this is unacceptable. I'm leaving. We'll have to reschedule." "No." The receptionist's voice was sharp, almost panicked. "You can't leave, Mr. Thompson. The doctor is expecting you. He's been waiting a very long time for this appointment." I froze, my hand on the door. "What are you talking about? I've been here for 5 hours. How could he be waiting for me?" She opened her mouth to respond, but at that moment, a door behind her opened. A nurse stepped out, her scrubs an unsettling shade of red in the fading light. "The doctor will see you now, Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice oddly flat. Relief flooded through me, quickly followed by a renewed sense of unease. Something about the nurse's blank expression sent a chill down my spine. "Finally," I muttered, following her down a long, dimly lit hallway. Had it always been this dark back here, this quiet? We passed door after door, each numbered but otherwise identical. The nurse's footsteps echoed hollowly, mine a syncopated counterpoint that seemed too loud in the oppressive silence. "Here we are," she said suddenly, stopping so abruptly I nearly ran into her. "Exam room 237. The doctor is waiting." She opened the door and gestured for me to enter. The room beyond was dark, illuminated only by a faint, pulsing light I couldn't quite locate. "Aren't you coming in?" I asked, hesitating at the threshold. The nurse shook her head, that blank expression never changing. "The doctor prefers to conduct these examinations privately. Go on in, Mr. Talton. He's been waiting a very long time for you." Before I could protest, she gave me a gentle push. I stumbled into the room, the door clicking shut behind me with a finality that made my heart race. "Hello?" I called out, my eyes struggling to adjust to the gloom. "Dr. Patel." "Not quite," a voice responded from the darkness. It was low, raspy, nothing like Dr. Patel's warm baritone. "But I've been expecting you, David Thompson. Please, have a seat." A shape loomed out of the shadows. An examination table, its paper covering crinkling as I perched uncertainly on its edge. "I'm sorry," I said, squinting into the darkness. "I think there's been some mistake. I'm just here for a routine checkup with Dr. Patel." A dry chuckle emanated from the far corner of the room. "Oh, David, there's no mistake. This appointment has been on the books for a very, very long time." The pulsing light grew brighter, and I could finally make out the figure speaking. It was wrong. Humanoid, yes, but too tall, too thin. Its head was oddly elongated, its fingers impossibly long and tipped with what looked unsettlingly like claws. I tried to stand, to run, but found myself frozen in place. My heart hammered in my chest, but my body refused to respond to my panicked commands. "What? What are you?" I managed to croak out. The creature stepped closer, and I caught a glimpse of its face. Where eyes should have been, there were only dark, empty sockets. Its mouth, when it opened to speak, was filled with row upon row of needle-sharp teeth. "I am many things, David," it said, those impossible fingers reaching for me. "A doctor of sorts, a keeper of appointments, a collector of debts long overdue." Its cold hand pressed against my chest, and suddenly I remembered. Memories flooded back, memories of a life I'd never lived. Or had I? I saw myself as a child, making a desperate bargain with a shadow in my closet. Saw myself as a teenager, trying to forget the price I'd agreed to pay. Saw myself growing older, building a life, always with that nagging feeling that I'd forgotten something important. "You remember now, don't you?" the creature asked, its voice almost gentle. "The appointment you made, the debt you owe." I nodded, unable to speak. Tears streamed down my face as I remembered the lonely, frightened child I'd been. The deal I'd made for a better life, for success and love and happiness. The price I'd agreed to pay. "It's time, David," the creature said, those long fingers wrapping around my wrist. "Your life has been lived, your happiness experienced. Now, it's time to fulfill your end of the bargain." I wanted to protest, to beg for more time, but I knew it was useless. A deal was a deal, and I'd had my allotted years. Will it hurt?" I asked, my voice small and scared. The creature's lipless mouth stretched into what might have been a smile. "Only for a moment. And then you'll have an eternity to reflect on the life you've lived, the joy you've experienced, the love you've known. Was it worth it, David? Was it worth the price?" As those clawed hands began to pull me into the darkness, as the life I'd lived began to fade away like a half-remembered dream, I found myself nodding. "Yes," I whispered. "It was worth it." The darkness enveloped me, and I felt myself dissolving, becoming part of something vast and unknowable. My last conscious thought was of Sarah, my wife, and the life we'd shared. A life made possible by a forgotten appointment, finally kept. In a brightly lit waiting room, a receptionist looked up as the door opened. A young man entered, his face pinched with worry. "I have an appointment," he said hesitantly. "With? I'm not sure. They just told me to come here." The receptionist smiled, a practiced expression that never quite reached her eyes. "Of course, sir. Please, have a seat. The doctor will be with you shortly." As the young man sat down, the receptionist glanced at her computer screen. Another name appeared on the day's schedule, decades in the future. Another appointment made, another debt to be collected. The clock on the wall ticked steadily onward, counting down the seconds, the minutes, the years, until the next forgotten appointment would be remembered. And in the shadows of exam room 237, a patient collector of debts waited, as it always had, as it always would. Story 11. The first time I heard the noise, I convinced myself it was just the wind. A low, mournful sound, barely audible over the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant rumble of traffic. But there was something about it that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Something almost human. I'd been working the night shift at Securestore self-storage for about a month. It wasn't a bad gig, all things considered. Quiet, easy, and it paid well enough. Most nights, I'd just sit in the security office, watching the CCTV feeds and making my hourly rounds. Nothing ever happened until that night. It was around 2 a.m. when I first heard it. I was halfway through my third cup of coffee, idly flipping through camera feeds, when the sound caught my attention. A soft, keening wail coming from somewhere in the facility. I sat up straighter, suddenly alert. "Hello," I called out, feeling slightly foolish. Of course, no one answered. I was alone in the building. At least, I was supposed to be. I pulled up the feeds from the interior cameras, scanning for any sign of movement. Nothing. Just endless rows of identical storage units, bathed in the sickly glow of security lighting. The sound came again, louder this time. It was definitely coming from inside the building. I grabbed my flashlight and radio, steeling myself for a walkthrough. Probably just some animal that had gotten trapped inside, I told myself. A cat, maybe, or a raccoon. The storage facility was a maze of long, identical corridors lined with roll-up doors. My footsteps echoed hollowly as I walked, the beam of my flashlight casting long shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. "Hello?" I called out again. "Is anyone there?" The wailing sound stopped abruptly, replaced by an even more unsettling silence. I found myself straining to hear something, anything, over the pounding of my own heart. That's when I noticed it. Unit 237. Unlike the other units, its door was ever so slightly ajar. Just an inch or two, but enough to send a chill down my spine. I was sure I'd checked all the units at the start of my shift. They'd all been securely locked. I approached cautiously, my hand hovering over the radio at my belt. "This is security," I announced, trying to keep my voice steady. "If someone's in there, come out now." Silence. Then, so faint I almost missed it, a whisper. "Help me." It was my voice. My voice, coming from inside that unit, pleading for help. I stumbled backward, my heart racing. This wasn't possible. I fumbled for my radio, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip it. "Control, this is Mike at Securestore," I managed to say. "I've got a possible break-in. Unit Kedua, Ratus 37 requesting backup." The radio crackled, and a familiar voice responded. My voice. "Copy that. Mike. Help is on the way. Just sit tight." I dropped the radio like it had burned me. What the hell was going on? The door to Unit 237 slowly began to rise, the metal groaning in protest. Darkness yawned beyond, deeper and more absolute than seemed possible. And from that darkness, a figure emerged. It was me, or rather, something wearing my face. It moved jerkily, like a marionette with tangled strings. Its eyes were wrong, too dark, too deep. When it smiled, its mouth stretched impossibly wide, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. "Hello, Mike," it said in my voice. "We've been waiting for you." I ran. Blind panic propelled me through the maze-like corridors, my feet pounding against the concrete floor. Behind me, I could hear something. Not footsteps, but a wet, slithering sound that seemed to be getting closer. I burst into the security office, slamming the door behind me and fumbling with the lock. For a moment, all I could hear was my own ragged breathing and the frantic pounding of my heart. Then, A tap at the window. I turned slowly, dreading what I might see. Faces pressed against the glass. Dozens of them. All wearing my face. All wearing that same terrible smile. Their bodies were wrong, twisted and elongated, bending in ways that should have been impossible. "Let us in, Mike," they chanted in unison. My voice distorted and multiplied. "It's time to join us." I scrambled for the phone, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then, a click as it was answered. 911, what's your emergency? My voice again, calm and professional. I slammed the phone down, a sob catching in my throat. This couldn't be happening. It couldn't be real. A glance at the CCTV monitors stopped my heart. Every screen showed the same image. Unit 237. Its door wide open. And emerging from each unit, in every corridor of the massive facility, were copies of me. Hundreds of them. Thousands. All moving towards the security office. All wearing that terrible, hungry smile. The door began to buckle as they pressed against it. The window cracked, spiderwebbing under the pressure of too many hands. In that moment, as the barrier between me and those things began to fail, a memory surfaced. A childhood nightmare, long forgotten. A dark place, filled with voices. Voices that sounded like me, promising me I'd never be alone if I just let them in. Promising me power, immortality. All I had to do was say yes. I'd said no then. I'd woken up, safe in my bed, the nightmare fading like mist in the morning sun. But now I realized it had never really gone away. It had just been waiting for me to come back, waiting for me to remember. As the door finally gave way, as those twisted versions of myself poured into the room, I understood. This was always going to happen. From the moment I took this job, from the moment I first walked past Unit 237, this was inevitable. They surrounded me, their cold hands reaching out, their voices, my voice, rising in a cacophony of triumph and hunger. "Welcome home, Mike," they said as one. "We've missed you." As they pulled me into their embrace, as I felt my body begin to twist and change, I had one last coherent thought. Who would be the next night guard? Who would be the next me? The facility was quiet again by the time the morning shift arrived. Everything was in its place, all units securely locked. In the security office, a lone figure sat watching the monitors. "Morning, Mike," the day guard said as he entered. "Anything to report?" The figure turned, a pleasant smile on a face that was almost, but not quite, Mike's. "All quiet," it said in Mike's voice. "Just another night shift." As the day guard settled in, the thing that had been Mike headed for the exit. It paused by Unit 237, its hand resting briefly on the cold metal door. Inside, something shifted, a soft keening sound barely audible. It whispered, "Not yet, but soon. There's always another night shift." It walked out into the morning sunlight, adjusting to its new skin, its new life. And deep within the storage facility, in the darkness of Unit 237, the hunger waited, patient, eternal, ready for the next night shift, and the next Mike, and the next, and the next. Because in the end, we all have a Unit 237 waiting for us, a place where our darkest dreams and forgotten nightmares live. And sooner or later, we all have to face what's inside. The night shift never really ends, it just finds a new guard. Story 12. I found the path on a Tuesday morning, the kind of crisp autumn day that makes you glad to be alive. The trees in the park were a riot of red and gold, and the air smelled of wood smoke and possibility. I was running late for work, as usual, cutting through the park at a jog when I saw it. A narrow dirt trail I'd never noticed before, snaking off into a copse of ancient oaks. A wooden sign, weathered and barely legible, proclaimed, "Shortcut to Maple Street." My office was on Maple. I checked my watch, grimacing at the time. I was already 15 minutes behind schedule. "What the hell?" I muttered, veering onto the path. Might as well try it. The moment I stepped onto the trail, the sounds of the city seemed to fade away. The crunch of leaves under my feet and the rustle of branches overhead became unnaturally loud in the sudden quiet. A cool breeze kissed the back of my neck, carrying with it a scent I couldn't quite place. Something old and earthy and not entirely pleasant. The path curved gently, weaving between gnarled tree trunks that seemed to loom over me. Had these oaks always been so tall, so imposing? I quickened my pace, an inexplicable unease settling in my gut. Just as I was starting to wonder if I'd made a mistake, the trees thinned and I emerged onto Maple Street. I blinked in surprise, checking my watch again. The entire trip had taken less than 5 minutes. I'd cut my usual commute time in half. Well, I said to myself, smoothing down my wind-blown hair, that's handy. I made it to work with time to spare, earning a raised eyebrow from my perpetually annoyed boss. As I settled into my cubicle, I couldn't shake the memory of that path. The eerie quiet, the looming trees, that strange scent. But hey, it had gotten me to work on time. That was all that mattered, right? The next morning, I deliberately left my apartment a few minutes late. I told myself I was just testing the shortcut, making sure it wasn't a fluke. But if I'm being honest, there was something else drawing me back. A curiosity, a hunger for something I couldn't quite name. The path was there, right where I'd left it. But as I stepped onto it, I could have sworn it looked different. Narrower, maybe. The trees closer together, their branches reaching out like grasping fingers. I shook off the fanciful thought and started walking. Almost immediately, I noticed something odd. The path curved more sharply than I remembered, zigzagging between trees in a way that didn't make sense given how quickly I'd arrived at Maple Street yesterday. Guess I wasn't paying attention, I muttered, picking up my pace. The air grew colder as I walked, mist curling around my ankles. That scent was back, stronger now. Decay and damp earth and something else. Something metallic. A twig snapped somewhere behind me, and I whirled around. Nothing there. Just trees and mist and shadows that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. By the time I emerged onto Maple Street, my heart was pounding and I was covered in a fine sheen of cold sweat. But I'd made it to work early again. That was what mattered. Days passed, and I found myself taking the shortcut every morning. Each time, the path seemed to change. Sometimes it was longer, sometimes shorter. The trees grew more twisted, their bark taking on patterns that looked disturbingly like faces frozen in silent screams. I started seeing things out of the corner of my eye, flickers of movement, shapes that vanished when I turned to look. Once, I could have sworn I saw someone standing just off the path. A figure in a dark cloak, face hidden in shadow. But when I blinked, they were gone. I knew I should stop. Knew I should go back to my old route, safe and boring and normal. But I couldn't. The shortcut had its hooks in me. Every morning, my feet carried me to that narrow dirt path of their own accord. It was about 2 weeks in when I heard the voice. I was halfway down the trail, the the mist thicker than ever when it came. A whisper, so faint I almost missed it. "Help me." I froze, my blood turning to ice. "Hello," I called out, my voice shaking. "Is someone there?" "Please," the voice came again, stronger now. It sounded like a child, scared and alone. "I'm lost. Can you help me?" Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get out of there as fast as I could. But the thought of a kid, alone in this place, I couldn't just leave. I stepped off the path, peering into the gloom between the trees. "Where are you?" "Keep talking, I'll find you." "This way," the voice called, deeper in the woods now. "Please, hurry." I plunged into the underbrush, branches scratching at my face and arms. The mist swirled around me, so thick now I could barely see a foot in front of my face. The voice kept calling, always just out of reach. I don't know how long I wandered. Time seemed to lose all meaning in that strange, twilight world. At some point, I realized I could no longer see the path. Panic clawed at my throat. "Hello," I shouted, my voice echoing strangely. "Kid, where are you?" Silence. Then a laugh. Not a child's laugh. Something old and cold and hungry. "Oh, you humans," a voice purred from the mist. My voice. So predictable. So easy to lure astray. The mist parted, revealing a figure. It was me, but wrong. Its eyes were too dark, it smiled too wide, filled with needle-sharp teeth. What are you?" I stammered, backing away. It cocked its head, that terrible smile never wavering. "I'm you," it said. "The you that took the shortcut one too many times. The you that strayed from the path. The you that's been trapped here for, oh, a very long time." Other figures melted out of the mist. Dozens of them. Hundreds. All wearing my face. All smiling that hungry smile. "You see," my doppelganger continued, taking a step closer, "the shortcut doesn't just cut through space. It cuts through time. Through realities. Every time you take it, you leave a little piece of yourself behind. And eventually, the others chorused. Their voices a horrifying blend of my own. You leave it all behind. I turned to run, but there was nowhere to go. The path was gone. There was only mist and trees and those terrible copies of myself, closing in from all sides. "Don't worry," my devil said, reaching for me with hands that were elongating into claws. "You'll get used to it, and soon you'll help us lure the next one. The next you. There's always another shortcut taker." As their cold hands grasped me, as I felt myself being pulled apart and remade, I had one last coherent thought. I was going to be late for work. The next morning, a jogger noticed a new path cutting through the park. A weathered sign proclaimed it a shortcut to Maple Street. He checked his watch and smiled. He was running late, after all. Couldn't hurt to try it, right? At the edge of the path, a figure watched. It wore the jogger's face, but its eyes were too dark, its smile too wide. It had been waiting a long time for this moment. "Welcome," it whispered as the jogger stepped onto the path. "We've been expecting you." The mist swirled, the trees groaned, and the shortcut claimed another victim. After all, there's always someone running late. Always someone looking for an easier way. Always someone willing to stray from the path. And in that twilight world between realities, we wait. We watch. We hunger. So the next time you're running late, and you see a shortcut you've never noticed before, think twice. Because some paths, once taken, can never be untaken. And the shortcut you find might just be a long way down. Story 13. The first message popped up on my screen at 2:37 a.m. Its cheerful ping cutting through the silence of my darkened bedroom. I blinked blearily at my phone, wondering who could be texting me at this ungodly hour. It wasn't a text. It was a chat request from someone called Your True Friend, on a social media app I rarely used. Curiosity overrode my better judgment, and I accepted. Hello, Alex. Having trouble sleeping? I sat up straighter, suddenly wide awake. How did they know my name? How did they know I was awake? Who is this? I typed back, my fingers trembling slightly. The reply came almost instantly. Just a friend. Someone who understands you better than anyone else ever could. I should have blocked them right then and there. Should have turned off my phone and gone to sleep. But something about their words hooked me. I'd always been the odd one out. Too quiet, too intense, never quite fitting in. The idea that someone could understand me, truly understand me, was intoxicating. How can you understand me? I asked. You don't even know me. Another instant reply. Oh, but I do, Alex. I know you're lying in bed right now, staring at your phone in the dark. I know you're wearing the faded blue pajamas your mum got you for Christmas 2 years ago. I know you're worried about your history test tomorrow, and that you haven't studied nearly enough. A chill ran down my spine. I glanced around my room, half expecting to see a camera hidden in a corner. But everything was as it always was. My cluttered desk, my overflowing bookshelf, my history textbook lying accusingly on my nightstand. How do you know all that? I demanded. Are you spying on me? Not spying, Alex. Observing. Understanding. I'm here to help you. To be the friend you've always needed. Against my better judgment, I kept talking to them. They seemed to know everything about me. My fears, my dreams, my deepest insecurities. Things I'd never told anyone. With each message, I felt a strange mix of fear and fascination. As the night wore on, your true friend began to make predictions. Small things at first. What I'd have for breakfast. What shirt I'd choose to wear. To my amazement, they were always right. Then bigger things. They knew I'd ace my history test, despite my lack of preparation. They knew my crush, Sarah, would finally talk to me at lunch. They knew I'd get into a fight with my best friend Jake, over a misunderstanding. Every prediction came true. My life began to revolve around our nightly chats. I'd rush home from school, ignore my homework, and wait impatiently for 2:37 a.m. to roll around. Your dear friend's knowledge of my life became increasingly precise, increasingly impossible. They described conversations I'd had when I was alone in my room. They knew about the secret journal I kept hidden under a loose floorboard. They even knew about the recurring nightmare I'd never told anyone about. The one where I was lost in an endless, twisting corridor, always hearing a familiar voice just around the next corner. How do you know all this? I asked one night, a week into our strange friendship. It's impossible, are you? Are you reading my mind or something? The pause before their reply was longer than usual. When it came, it sent a shiver down my spine. In a way, Alex. In a way, the next day at school, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I turned a corner, I expected to see someone there. Every time I caught my reflection in a window or mirror, I could have sworn I saw a shadow move behind me. That night, your true friend was unusually quiet. Their messages were shorter, more cryptic. And then, at 3:13 a.m., they sent something that made my blood run cold. It's time, Alex. Time for us to meet face to face. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling. What do you mean? How? Open your closet door, Alex. I stared at my closet, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. This was crazy. There was no way. But I found myself standing up, walking across my room on shaky legs. My hand reached out for the doorknob, almost of its own accord. "That's it," the message on my phone encouraged. "Open it, I'm waiting." I took a deep breath and yanked the door open. Nothing. Just my clothes, my shoes, the usual clatter of a teenager's closet. I let out a shaky laugh, relief flooding through me. Of course, there was nothing there. What had I been expecting? I turned back to my phone, ready to call out your true friend on their bluff. But there was a new message waiting. "Look closer, Alex. I'm here. I've always been here." A movement caught my eye. My full-length mirror mounted on the inside of the closet door. In it, I saw my room reflected. My bed, my desk, my own pale face. And behind me, a figure. Tall, indistinct, its features obscured by shadow. But its eyes were mine. I whirled around, but there was nothing there. When I looked back at the mirror, the figure was gone. My phone pinged again. "Do you understand now? Alex, do you see?" My hands shook so badly I could barely type. "What are you?" The reply came instantly. "I'm you, Alex. The you that you could be. The you that you will be. I'm your future, reaching back through time and space to guide you, to shape you." I backed away from the mirror, from my phone, my mind reeling. This couldn't be real. It couldn't be happening. But deep down, I knew it was true. It explained everything. The impossible knowledge, the accurate predictions. Your true friend wasn't some random internet stranger. It was me. A future version of me, somehow reaching back through time. "Why?" I typed, not even sure if I wanted an answer. "Why are you doing this?" The pause before the reply seemed to stretch for an eternity. "Because it was done to me, Alex. Because it's always been done. An endless loop of past and future, each version guiding the next, shaping ourselves into something more." As I read those words, memories began to surface. Memories that weren't mine, or weren't mine yet. I saw myself, older, hunched over a computer, reaching out to a younger me. I saw countless versions of myself, stretching back and forward through time, each one guiding the next. "What happens now?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Now, you wait, you grow, and when the time comes, you reach back, you find yourself, and the cycle continues." I sank to the floor, my back against the bed, as the full weight of this revelation crashed over me. I wasn't just talking to my future self. I was becoming my future self. The Alex who would one day reach back through time to guide a younger version of myself. As the sun began to rise, casting long shadows across my room, I picked up my phone one last time. "I understand," I typed. "I'm ready." The reply was simple, final. "We know. We've always known. Goodbye, Alex. Until we meet again." The chat window disappeared. Your true friend vanished as if it had never existed. But I knew the truth now. Knew that somewhere out there, I was waiting, watching, guiding myself towards a future I couldn't yet imagine. As I got ready for school that morning, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. For a moment, just a moment, I saw something else in my reflection. A flicker of someone older, wiser, infinitely more complex. My future self, watching, waiting. I smiled, and my reflection smiled back. The cycle would continue. It always had. It always would. And somewhere, in the depths of the internet, a chat request appeared on a young teenager's phone. "Hello, having trouble sleeping? Don't worry, I'm here to help. I'm your true friend." The cycle begins anew. After all, we all need a friend who truly understands us. Even if that friend is our own future self, reaching back through the maze of time to guide us, to shape us, to create the future that has always been waiting. Story 14. The first thing I noticed when I stepped into the elevator was the button. It shouldn't have been there. I'd worked in the Grayson building for 5 years, and I knew for a fact it only had 12 floors. So why was there a button for floor 13? I blinked, rubbing my eyes. It had been a long day, full of mind-numbing meetings and endless spreadsheets. I was tired, that's all. I was seeing things. But when I looked again, the button was still there. Smudged and worn, like all the others, but undeniably real. My finger hovered over it, a mix of curiosity and unease churning in my gut. Hold the elevator. I jerked my hand back as my coworker, Dave, jogged in, slightly out of breath. "Thanks, Sarah," he said, flashing me a smile. "Hey, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I opened my mouth to ask him about the button, but something stopped me. Instead, I forced a smile. "Just tired. Long day, you know." He nodded sympathetically as he pressed the button for the lobby. We rode down in silence, but I couldn't take my eyes off that impossible 13th button. Dave didn't seem to notice it at all. As soon as I got home, I Googled the Grayson building. Every source confirmed what I already knew. 12 floors, no 13th. I told myself to forget about it. Clearly, I was more exhausted than I'd realized. Maybe it was time for a vacation, but I couldn't forget. That night, I dreamed of elevators, of rising and falling, of buttons that appeared and disappeared, and always that worn 13 button calling to me. The next morning, I arrived at work early. The lobby was nearly empty as I stepped into the elevator. My hand was shaking as I reached out, my finger brushing against the cool metal of the 13 button. I pressed it. For a moment, nothing happened. The elevator didn't move. I let out a shaky laugh, relief washing over me. Of course, it wasn't real. I'd just imagined it all. Then, with a lurch that nearly knocked me off my feet, the elevator began to rise. The floor numbers ticked by faster than they should have. A blur of red digital numbers: 0.10, 11, 12. The elevator should have stopped, but it kept going. The numbers now replaced by static, a harsh buzzing filling the small space. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. With a final, sickening lurch, the elevator stopped. The doors slid open with a cheerful ding that seemed obscene in the heavy silence. I stepped out into a world of dust and shadows. The 13th floor stretched out before me, a perfect replica of my own office floor. But wrong. Everything was covered in a thick layer of grayish dust. The air was stale, carrying the musty scent of long-abandoned spaces. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. No response, just the hollow echo of my own voice bouncing back at me. I moved further into the floor, my footsteps leaving clear tracks in the dust. It was like stepping into a time capsule. The decor, the furniture, even the computers on the desks were outdated, relics from at least a decade ago. As I passed by the cubicles, something caught my eye. A nameplate, half buried in dust. I wiped it clean and felt my blood run cold. Sarah Jensen, it read. My name. With shaking hands, I began to clear away more of the dust. Family photos emerged. My family, but younger. A coffee mug with a faded logo from my college. A calendar open to October 2013. This was my desk, my cubicle. But I'd never worked here. I'd never even seen this floor before today. A sound behind me made me whirl around. For a split second, I thought I saw a figure at the end of the hallway. Tall, indistinct, watching me. But when I blinked, it was gone. I stumbled back to the elevator, my heart racing. None of this made sense. As the doors closed, I caught a glimpse of movement again. A face, half hidden in shadow. My face, but older, sadder. The ride back down was normal. When the doors opened onto the lobby, I've half expected to see that dust-covered world again. But everything was as it should be. People milling about, the security guard at his desk, the morning sun streaming through the windows. I called in sick that day. Spent hours researching the building's history, looking for any mention of a hidden floor, a forgotten level. Nothing. That night, I dreamed again. I was on the 13th floor, but it was alive with activity. People I didn't recognize nodded and smiled at me as I passed. I sat down at my desk, my impossible, non-existent desk, and began to work. A hand touched my shoulder. I looked up to see an older woman, her face kind but sad. "It's time to remember, Sarah," she said. Her voice was familiar, though I'd never heard it before. "You can't keep hiding up here forever." I woke up gasping, the echo of her words ringing in my ears. For the next week, I avoided the elevator. I took the stairs, no matter how many weird looks I got from my co-workers. But I couldn't avoid the dreams. Every night, I found myself back on that floor, working, laughing, living a life I'd never lived. And every night, that woman would appear. "Remember," she'd say. "It's time to remember." After a week of sleepless nights and growing paranoia, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know the truth. I arrived at work in the early hours of the morning, long before anyone else would be there. The elevator seemed to be waiting for me, doors sliding open as soon as I approached. My hand was steady this time as I pressed the 13 button. The 13th floor was just as I remembered it. Dusty, abandoned, frozen in time. But now, as I walked through the silent corridors, memories began to surface. Memories of a life I'd never lived. Or had I? I remembered my first day here, fresh out of college, eager to start my career. I remembered office parties, late nights, working on big projects. I remembered the day I got promoted, the day I first met Dave. Dave, the memories hit me like a physical blow. Dave and I, stealing kisses in the supply closet. Dave proposing to me right here, in front of my desk. Dave? The accident. Oh God, the accident. I staggered, gripping the edge of a dusty desk for support as the memories flooded back. The icy road, the screech of tires, the sickening crunch of metal. I'd survived. Dave hadn't. After that, I'd retreated into myself, into my work. I'd spend days up here, not eating, barely sleeping. My co-workers tried to help, but I pushed them away. Until one day, I just stopped coming. A sound made me turn. There, at the end of the hallway, stood the woman from my dreams. But now I recognized her. It was me, an older version of me, her hair streaked with grey, lines of sorrow etched into her face. "You remember now," she said softly. I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "What is this place?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "It's a refuge," she replied. a place you created to escape the pain. But it's not real, Sarah, and you can't stay here anymore. I don't want to remember, I whispered. It hurts too much. She smiled sadly. I know, but you have to. For Dave, for yourself. It's time to live again. She held out her hand. After a moment's hesitation, I took it. The world around us began to fade, the dust and shadows melting away. I felt a tugging sensation, as if I was being pulled in two directions at once. I blinked, and I was back in the elevator. But now I remembered everything. The years of therapy, of slowly rebuilding my life. The day I'd finally felt strong enough to return to work. The moment I'd stepped into this elevator and, in a desperate bid to escape the flood of painful memories, had imagined a button that would take me back to a time before the pain. As the elevator descended, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The grief was still there, but it no longer threatened to overwhelm me. The doors opened onto the lobby. My lobby. The real lobby, full of people living their lives, moving forward. It was time for me to do the same. As I stepped out, I glanced back at the elevator's control panel. The 13 button was gone. It had never really been there at all. But that was okay. I didn't need it anymore. It was time to remember, time to live, time to find the real Sarah Jensen again. After all, some flaws are best left forgotten. Story 15. The box sat on my front porch, innocuous and brown, addressed to Sarah Miller, 1640 to Sycamore Lane. But I'm not Sarah Miller, and this isn't Sycamore Lane. I'm Emily Parker, and I live at 1642 Maple Street. Close, but not quite right. I picked up the package, surprised by its weight. Whatever was inside felt substantial, solid. For a moment, I considered just leaving it there, letting the delivery company sort out their mistake. But Sarah Miller lived just one street over. It wouldn't be that much trouble to drop it off myself. If only I'd known then what that simple act of neighborliness would unleash. The walk to Sycamore Lane was pleasant enough. It was one of those perfect autumn afternoons, all crisp air and golden sunlight. Leaves crunched under my feet as I made my way down the winding suburban streets. Sarah's house was a mirror image of my own. Same red brick, same white trim, same neatly manicured lawn. Even the car in the driveway was the same make and model as mine, though hers was blue instead of red. I rang the doorbell, package in hand, ready to make a quick handoff and head home. But as the seconds ticked by with no answer, my curiosity began to grow. What was in this box that felt so weirdly familiar in my hands? Just as I was about to give up and leave, the door creaked open. A woman stood there, and for a heart-stopping moment, I thought I was looking in a mirror. She had my face, my hair, my eyes. But there were subtle differences. A scar on her cheek I didn't have. A streak of grey in her hair that wasn't in mine. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice unsettlingly similar to my own. I blinked, trying to shake off the eerie feeling of déjà vu. Yes. Are you Sarah Miller? This package was delivered to my house by mistake. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Oh, wonderful. I've been expecting this. Would you like to come in? I just made some tea. Every instinct screamed at me to politely decline and leave, but my curiosity overrode my common sense. I found myself nodding, following this strange doppelganger into her home. The interior was a funhouse mirror version of my own house. The layout was identical, but everything was just slightly off. The couch was the same style as mine, but in a deep burgundy instead of navy. The coffee table was the same shape, but made of a darker wood. Family photos lined the walls, but the faces were blurred, indistinct. "Make yourself comfortable," Sarah said, gesturing to the couch. "I'll get that tea." As soon as she left the room, I found myself drawn to those photos. I moved closer, trying to make out the faces. But the closer I got, the more distorted they became. In one, I could almost swear I saw my own face, but older, sadder, with that same streak of grey in my hair. "Here we are!" Sarah's voice made me jump. She set down a tray with 2 steaming mugs. "Now, let's see what's in that package, shall we?" I handed it over, watching as she tore into the brown paper with an eagerness that bordered on frenzy. Inside was a wooden box, intricately carved with swirling patterns that seemed to move if I looked at them too long. Sarah opened the box and pulled out a key, old and brass, with a complex, alien-looking design on its head. "Perfect," she breathed, her eyes gleaming. "It's finally here." "What is it?" I asked, unable to contain my curiosity. She looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time since I'd arrived. "It's a key, Emily. A very special key. One that opens doors that shouldn't exist." A chill ran down my spine. I hadn't told her my name. "How did you know your name?" she finished, smiling that not quite right smile again. "Oh, Emily, I know everything about you, because I am you. Or rather, I'm the you from another reality. A reality where you made different choices, where you became me." I stood up, my heart pounding. This was insane. Impossible. "I think I should go," I said, backing towards the door. "You can't leave yet," Sarah said, her voice taking on a hard edge. "You're a part of this now. You delivered the key. You opened the door." "I didn't open any door," I protested. But even as I said it, I realized it wasn't true. By bringing that package here, by stepping into this house, I had opened something. Something that couldn't be closed again. Sarah stood, the key clutched in her hand. "Let me show you," she said, moving towards the hallway. "Let me show you what could have been. What still could be." Against my better judgment, I followed her. We stopped in front of a door I knew shouldn't be there. In my house, this was a blank wall. But here, there was a door. Old, wooden, with that same swirling pattern carved into its surface. Sarah inserted the key into the lock. It turned with a sound like screaming metal. The door swung open, revealing not a room, but a swirling vortex of colors and shapes. And in that chaos, I saw glimpses of other lives, other versions of myself. There I was, in a wedding dress, marrying a man I'd never met. There I was, accepting a Nobel Prize. There I was, holding a baby, surrounded by a family I didn't recognize. You see, Sarah's voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. So many possibilities, so many lives you could have lived, that you did live in other realities. I tore my gaze away from the vortex, looking at Sarah, but she was changing, shifting. One moment she was me, the next she was someone else entirely. Her face cycled through dozens of variations, each one a path I could have taken. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Want?" She laughed, the sound echoing strangely. "I want you to choose, to step through and become one of these other selves, to leave behind the life you know and embrace a new reality." I shook my head, backing away. "No, this isn't real. It can't be real." "Oh, but it is," she said, reaching for me with a hand that kept changing, shifting from young to old, from familiar to alien. "And you have to choose. Because if you don't, if you try to go back to your old life now, you'll always know what you missed. You'll always wonder about the roads not taken." I could feel the pull of the vortex behind me, whispering promises of lives unlived, of potential unfulfilled. Part of me wanted to turn, to look again at those other selves, those other possibilities. But another part of me, a stronger part, rebelled against this impossible choice. No, I said, my voice stronger now. No, I choose my life. The one I've built. The one I know. Sarah's face contorted with rage. You can't do that. You have to choose a new path. I already have, I said, and with a surge of determination, I pushed past her, running for the front door. Behind me, I heard Sarah's scream of frustration, heard the sound of reality tearing itself apart, but I didn't look back. I ran out of the house, down the street, not stopping until I reached my own front door. I slammed it behind me, leaning against it as I gasped for breath. For a long moment, I just stood there, waiting for something. For Sarah to appear, for reality to unravel, for that swirling vortex to swallow me whole. But nothing happened. My house was just my house. Normal. Familiar. Mine, as the days passed. I tried to convince myself. It had all been a vivid hallucination. A waking dream brought on by stress or lack of sleep. But sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I'd catch a glimpse of something impossible. A door where there shouldn't be one. A face in a mirror that wasn't quite mine. And sometimes, late at night, I'd hear a key turning in a lock that didn't exist. I never saw Sarah Miller again. Her house stood empty, a for sale sign eventually appearing in the yard. But no one ever bought it. It just stood there, a mirror image of my own home, a constant reminder of the choice I'd made. Because in the end, that's what it all comes down to. Choices, the ones we make and the ones we don't. The lives we live and the ones we leave behind. And sometimes, a simple package delivered to the wrong address can open doors we never knew existed. Doors that, once opened, can never truly be closed again. Story 16. The little orange bottle sat on my nightstand, innocuous yet somehow menacing in the pale morning light. Dr. Reeves had assured me this new medication would help with my chronic insomnia. But as I rolled the smooth plastic between my fingers, a nagging doubt gnawed at the pit of my stomach. Just give it a try, Megan, I muttered to myself, echoing the doctor's words. What's the worst that could happen? If only I'd known then how those words would come back to haunt me. I popped the cap off and shook out a single white pill. It looked ordinary enough, no different from any other medication I'd tried over the years. I swallowed it dry, grimacing at the bitter taste that lingered on my tongue. At first, nothing seemed different. I went about my day as usual. Work, errands, the mind-numbing routine of a life lived on too little sleep. But as evening fell, I began to notice something. Colors seemed more vibrant, edges sharper. The sunset painted the sky in hues I'd never seen before, swirls of color that seemed to pulse and breathe. I blinked hard, shaking my head, but the effect remained. Huh? I said aloud, my voice sounding oddly distant to my own ears. Guess it's working after all. That night, I fell asleep easier than I had in years. But my dreams were vivid, almost painfully so. I wandered through impossible landscapes, colors swirling and shifting around me. Voices whispered just at the edge of hearing, speaking in languages I didn't understand but somehow knew were important. I woke feeling more refreshed than I had in years, the dream images fading like mist in the morning sun. But as I went about my day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The world seemed more colorful, more detailed. more alive. In the break room at work, I overheard my co-workers chatting from across the room. Their voices were crystal clear, as if they were standing right next to me. I could hear the rustle of their clothes, the soft thud of their heartbeats. "You okay, Megan?" my friend Lisa asked, her brow furrowed in concern. "You look a little spaced out." I blinked, focusing on her face. Had her eyes always been that shade of green? I could see every individual fleck of color in her irises, every tiny movement of her pupils as they adjusted to the light. "I'm fine," I said, my voice sounding strange in my own ears. "Just adjusting to a new medication." As the days passed, the effects intensified. My senses became almost painfully sharp. I could hear conversations from blocks away, smell dinner cooking in my neighbor's house, see the individual grains in a wooden table. And the dreams. Oh, the dreams. Each night, I found myself in vast, alien landscapes. Creatures that defied description moved in the shadows, always just out of sight. And always, those whispers, growing louder, more insistent. 1 week in, I saw them for the first time. I was walking home from work, the setting sun painting the world in those impossible colors I'd grown accustomed to. Movement caught my eye, and I turned to see something, a shape, vaguely humanoid but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin, its limbs bending at impossible angles. It stood at the end of the street, half hidden in the lengthening shadows. As I watched, frozen in place, it turned its head towards me. Where its face should have been, there was only a swirling vortex of color and shadow. I blinked, and it was gone. But I could still feel its presence, a weight pressing against my mind. That night, I stared at the orange bottle, my hand shaking as I held the next pill. Part of me knew I should stop, should call Dr. Reeves and tell him what was happening. But a larger part, a part that grew stronger with each passing day, craved the heightened awareness, the vivid dreams, the glimpses of whatever they were. I swallowed the pill. The dreams that night were more intense than ever. I found myself in a vast chamber, its walls pulsing with otherworldly light. Those creatures were everywhere now, moving around me, through me. Their whispers had become a deafening roar, and suddenly I could understand. They were talking about me, about us, about how thin the veil between worlds had become. I woke with a start, drenched in sweat, the echoes of their voices still ringing in my ears. As I stumbled to the bathroom, I caught sight of my reflection in the mirror and froze. My eyes, they weren't mine anymore. The irises swirled with the same impossible colors I've been seeing everywhere. And behind them, in the depths of my pupils, I could see something moving. I should have been terrified, should have flushed the pills, called for help. But instead, I felt a thrill of excitement. I was seeing the world as it truly was, unfiltered by the limitations of human perception. The next few days passed in a blur of heightened sensation and increasing strangeness. The creatures were everywhere now, flitting at the edges of my vision, their whispers a constant background noise. I found myself understanding more and more of their alien language, comprehending concepts that should have been beyond human grasp. My co-workers grew distant, shooting me worried glances when they thought I wasn't looking. But how could I explain to them what I was experiencing? How could I describe the vast, multi-dimensional realities I glimpsed in my dreams? 1 week later, I stood in my bathroom, staring at my reflection. I barely recognized myself anymore. My skin seemed to shimmer, patterns moving just beneath the surface. My eyes were windows to other worlds, swirling vortexes of color and shadow. I reached for the orange bottle, but my hand passed right through it. I looked down, watching in fascination as my fingers became translucent, then disappeared entirely. "It's time," a voice said behind me. I turned to see one of the creatures, its form still indistinct but somehow more solid than before. "Time for what?" I asked, surprised to find I wasn't afraid. "To join us," it replied, its voice a symphony of impossible sounds. "To see beyond the veil. To become more than human." I should have been terrified, should have fought, should have screamed. But instead, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. This was right. This was meant to be. I took a step towards the creature, watching as my body began to fade, to shift and change. The bathroom around me dissolved, replaced by that vast chamber from my dreams. The creatures were everywhere, welcoming me, their whispers now a joyous chorus. As the last vestiges of my humanity fell away, I understood. The pills hadn't been medication. They had been a key, unlocking a door to a reality beyond human comprehension. And I had willingly, eagerly, stepped through. In that moment, as I felt myself becoming one with these impossible beings, a small part of me wondered about the life I was leaving behind, about the people who would miss me, who would wonder what had happened to Megan Thompson. But that thought faded quickly, lost in the vast ocean of knowledge and sensation that was my new existence. I was more now, more than human, more than any single reality could contain. And somewhere, in a bathroom, in a small apartment, an orange bottle fell to the floor, spilling white pills across the tile. The label read, "Thompson, Megan. Take 1 tablet daily. Warning, may cause unusual sensory experiences. Discontinue use and contact your doctor if you experience any unexpected effects." But Megan Thompson was beyond such warnings now. She had taken her prescription, had swallowed the key to another world, and in doing so, she had become something else entirely. As for Dr. Reeves, well, he just smiled as he prepared the next prescription for the next patient who complained of insomnia, of a life that seemed too small, too limited. After all, there were so many realities out there, so many beings eager to welcome humans into their fold, and all it took was one little pill, one little key to unlock the door. Story 17. Infel, it's plenty a little more one little P. The sense of déjà vu hit me like a physical force, making me pause in the narrow aisle. The flight attendant behind me gave a gentle cough, urging me forward. "Sorry," I mumbled, shoving my carry-on into the overhead compartment and sliding into my usual seat. 4A, exit row, window. Wait, my usual seat. I shook my head, trying to clear the fog. This was just another business trip, a routine flight from New York to Chicago. I'd done it 100 times before, but... "Excuse me," a voice interrupted my thoughts. I looked up to see a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair gesturing to the seat next to mine. "I believe I'm in one for B." I nodded and stood to let him pass. As he settled in, I couldn't shake the feeling that I knew him. Had we sat next to each other before? "I'm Tom," he said, extending his hand. "Heading to Chicago for business or pleasure." The words were out of my mouth before I could stop them. Business. Quarterly sales meeting. Same as always. Tom's eyebrows shot up. Well, that's quite a coincidence. I'm heading to a quarterly sales meeting too. Funny how these things work out, isn't it? I forced a laugh, but unease churned in my gut. This was more than coincidence. This was familiar. Too familiar. As the plane filled up, I found myself mouthing along with the safety demonstration, knowing exactly when the flight attendant would gesture to each exit. Even the turbulence as we took off felt predictable. the plane shuddering at precise moments I somehow anticipated. An hour into the flight, the smell of reheated pasta filled the cabin. I wrinkled my nose, turning to Tom. "Guess it's lasagna day again." He chuckled. "How'd you know? They haven't even started serving yet." I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. How did I know? The beverage cart rattled down the aisle. Without thinking, I reached for my wallet, pulling out exact change for a ginger ale I hadn't ordered yet. "Ginger ale?" the flight attendant asked, right on cue. I nodded mutely, handing over the money with shaking hands. Tom was giving me an odd look now. "You okay there, buddy? You're looking a bit pale." "I'm fine," I lied. "Just not a fan of flying." But it wasn't fear of flying that had my heart racing. It was the growing certainty that I'd lived this exact moment before. Not just once, but over and over again. I excused myself and made my way to the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face. In the tiny mirror, my reflection looked haggard, my eyes wide with a fear I couldn't explain. "Get it together," I muttered to myself. "It's just a normal flight. You're imagining things." But as I stepped out of the bathroom, I found myself mouthing along with the pilot's announcement about upcoming turbulence. Seconds later, the plane shuddered, right on cue. Back in my seat, I couldn't help but study the other passengers. The woman across the aisle was knitting, her needles clicking in a rhythm I could have sworn I'd heard 100 times before. 2 rows ahead, a child was playing a handheld game, the tinny music a familiar refrain. "So," Tom said, jolting me from my observations, "what line of work are you in?" I turned to answer, but the words caught in my throat. Tom's mouth was moving, but I already knew what he was going to say. In perfect sync, we both said, "Let me guess, software sales?" Tom's eyes widened in shock. How? How did you know that?" I shook my head, panic rising in my chest. I don't know any of this. But it's all happening exactly like I've seen it before." "Whoa, calm down there," Tom said, concern etching his features. "Maybe you're just having some déjà vu. It happens to everyone sometimes. But this was more than déjà vu." As if to prove my point, I found myself reaching out to steady Tom's drink just as the plane hit another patch of turbulence. The move was automatic, instinctive, and perfectly timed. Tom stared at me, his face pale. Okay, that was uncanny. I leaned in close, my voice barely above a whisper. "Tom, I think something's very wrong here. This flight, these people, I think we're stuck in some kind of loop." He laughed nervously. "Come on, that's crazy talk. We can't be in a loop. That's not how reality works." But even as he spoke, I saw the doubt creeping into his eyes. He was starting to feel it too. The eerie familiarity. The sense that we'd had this exact conversation before. I closed my eyes, trying to remember. How many times had we done this? How many times had I taken this flight, sat next to Tom, had this same realization? When I opened my eyes again, the cabin had changed. The other passengers were frozen in place, like mannequins. Only Tom and I seemed able to move. "What the hell?" Tom breathed, looking around wildly. I stood up, moving down the aisle. Each passenger was locked in a single moment. The knitting woman with her needles poised mid-stitch, the gaming child with his thumb hovering over a button. At the back of the plane, I found her. An old woman I hadn't noticed before, her eyes sharp and alert amidst the sea of frozen faces. "You're starting to remember," she said, her voice carrying easily in the unnatural silence. "Took you long enough. Remember what?" I asked, though deep down I already knew the answer. She smiled, but it was a sad expression. This flight, this loop. You've been here before, many times. You all have. She gestured to the frozen passengers. But why? Tom asked, having followed me down the aisle. Why are we stuck here? The old woman sighed. Because you can't move on. None of you can. You're all so caught up in your routines, your day-to-day lives, that you can't see the bigger picture. A chill ran down my spine as understanding dawned. This isn't really a flight to Chicago, is it? She shook her head. No, it's not. This plane. It never landed. And it never will until you all learn to let go. Memories began to surface. Not of past loops, but of a life before. A rushed morning, a delayed taxi, a mad dash through the airport. The plane taking off just as a storm was rolling in. Turbulence, worse than anything I'd ever experienced. Screams, a terrible rending of metal, and then, "We're dead," I whispered, the truth settling over me like a heavy blanket. The old woman nodded. Yes, but you're not ready to accept that yet. None of you are. So you would play this flight over and over, clinging to the routine and familiarity of it. Tom had gone pale, his hand shaking. No, this can't be real. I have a family, a life. Had, the woman corrected gently. It's time to let go, Tom. It's time for all of you to let go. As she spoke, the frozen passengers began to move again, but differently now. They stood, one by one, looks of recognition and sorrow dawning on their faces. How do we move on? I asked, feeling a weight lifting from my shoulders. Even as sorrow threatened to overwhelm me, the old woman stood, and suddenly she didn't look old at all. She was radiant, beautiful in a way that transcended human understanding. You just have to be willing to step off the plane, she said, gesturing to the exit door. To leave this familiar routine behind and embrace the unknown. I looked at Tom, saw the fear and acceptance warring in his eyes. Together, I asked. He nodded, taking a deep breath. Together, we moved to the exit door, the other passengers falling in behind us. With trembling hands, I reached for the handle. As the door swung open, there was no rush of wind, no drop to the earth below. Instead, there was light, warm, welcoming, and more real than anything I'd experienced in countless repetitions of this flight. I took Tom's hand, and together, we stepped into that light. As we did, I felt the last vestiges of my earthly routine, my mundane worries and everyday anxieties fall away. We were moving on, all of us, leaving behind the loop we'd been trapped in. And as we embraced whatever came next, I realized that true horror wasn't in death, but in being unable to let go of life. The routine flight was over. Our real journey was just beginning. Story 18. The for sale sign creaked in the autumn wind, its weathered post leaning at a precarious angle. I stood on the cracked sidewalk, staring up at the house I'd grown up in, a lump forming in my throat. It had been 15 years since I'd last set foot in this neighborhood. But 42 Willow Street looked exactly as I remembered it. Maybe that should have been my first warning. I fumbled with the key the realtor had given me, my hands shaking slightly as I approached the front door. The gardens, once my mother's pride and joy, were overgrown and wild. Weeds poked through the crumbling walkway, and the porch steps groaned under my weight. The key slid into the lock with surprising ease. No rust, no resistance. It was as if the house had been waiting for me. As the door swung open, I was hit by a wave of familiar scents. Mum's lavender potpourri, Dad's pipe tobacco, the faint mustiness of old books. It was like stepping back in time. For a moment, I half expected to hear Mum calling me for dinner or Dad's laughter booming from his study. But the house was silent, save for the soft creak of floorboards under my feet. I moved through the entryway, my eyes adjusting to the dim interior. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that managed to penetrate the grimy windows. Everything was exactly as I remembered it. The faded wallpaper, the worn carpet, even the family photos lining the hallway. I paused at one, wiping away a layer of dust. My 10-year-old self grinned back at me, gap-toothed and carefree. Mum and Dad stood behind me, their smiles frozen in time. A happy family, before everything went wrong. A sound from upstairs made me jump. A thud, like a book falling off a shelf. But that was impossible. The house had been empty for years. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. "Is someone there?" No response. Just the settling of an old house, I told myself. Nothing to worry about. I made my way to the living room, memories flooding back with each step. There was the old armchair where Dad used to read me stories. The fireplace where we'd roast marshmallows on cold winter nights. The corner where our Christmas tree would stand, glittering with lights and tinsel. But as I looked closer, I noticed something odd. There were no signs of decay. No water stains on the ceiling, no peeling wallpaper, no faded patches on the carpet where sunlight would have bleached it over the years. Everything looked preserved, as if the house had been sealed in a time capsule of the day we left. Another sound from upstairs, this time like the creak of a floorboard. My heart began to race. "If someone's up there, you need to leave," I shouted, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "This is private property." I waited, straining my ears for any response. Nothing. But the silence felt charged now, expectant, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Despite every instinct screaming at me to leave, I found myself drawn to the stairs. I had to know, had to see for myself that the upper floor was as empty as it should be. Each step creaked as I ascended, the sound impossibly loud in the quiet house. At the top of the stairs, I hesitated. To my left was my old bedroom. To the right, my parents' room. And straight ahead, the door to the attic. Always locked, always forbidden. A whisper of movement caught my attention. The attic door was ajar, a sliver of darkness visible in the gap. My breath caught in my throat. That door was never open. Never. "Hello," I called again, my voice barely above a whisper now. The door creaked open another inch in response. My feet moved of their own accord, carrying me towards that beckoning darkness. As I reached for the handle, a memory surfaced. Sharp, vivid, and terrifying. I was 6 years old, sneaking out of bed to get a glass of water. As I passed the attic door, I heard voices. Mum and Dad arguing in hushed, urgent tones. And another voice, low and guttural, unlike anything I'd ever heard before. Then a scream, quickly muffled. I'd run back to my room, hiding under the covers until morning. When I asked Mum about it at breakfast, she'd smiled that tight, forced smile and told me I must have been dreaming. But I hadn't been dreaming then, and I wasn't dreaming now. The attic door swung open fully, as if pulled by an unseen hand. The staircase beyond was swallowed in darkness, but I could hear something. A soft, rhythmic sound, like breathing. "Mom," I whispered, though I knew it was impossible. "Dad?" The breathing grew louder, faster. A shape began to form in the darkness at the top of the stairs. Vaguely human, but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin, its limbs bent at impossible angles. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. I had to get out, had to run. But as I turned, I found myself face to face with my 10-year-old self. I, stood there, gap-toothed and smiling. But the smile was all wrong. Too wide, too many teeth. And the eyes were black, bottomless pits. "Welcome home," my younger self said, its voice a grotesque parody of childish innocence. "We've been waiting for you," I ran. Down the stairs, through the hallway, my feet barely touching the ground. But the house had changed. The entryway stretched on forever, the front door always just out of reach. Family photos flew off the walls as I passed, shattering on the floor. In each broken frame, the faces were distorted, twisted into agonized screams. Behind me, I could hear them coming. The wet slap of bare feet on hardwood, the scrape of 2 long fingernails against the walls, and that voice, my voice, but not, calling out in sing-song tones. "Can't run forever. Can't escape. This is your home. This is where you belong." I finally reached the front door, yanking it open with all my strength. But instead of the overgrown front yard, I found myself staring into the attic. That thing from the stairs stood there, a writhing mass of shadows with pinprick eyes of burning white. "My child," it gurgled, reaching for me with hands that were more like claws. "My beautiful, faithful child. You've come back to us." "No," I screamed, slamming the door shut. I turned, ready to run again, but found myself in my old bedroom. Everything was as I remembered it. The model airplanes hanging from the ceiling, the bookshelf filled with adventure stories, the twin bed with its faded cowboy bedspread, and there, sitting on the edge of the bed, were my parents. "Mum, Dad," I whispered, hardly daring to believe it. They turned to look at me, and I had to bite back a scream. Their faces were gaunt, skeletal, their eyes sunken and lifeless. When Mum spoke, her voice was a dry rasp, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. "Why did you leave us, sweetheart? Why did you abandon us?" Dad's head lolled to the side, his neck bent at an unnatural angle. "We've been so lonely without you, so hungry." They stood, moving towards me with jerky, puppet-like motions. Behind them, the shadows coalesced into that monstrous shape from the attic. My younger self appeared in the doorway, that terrible grin still plastered on his face. "You see," he said, "you never left. Not really. A part of you has always been here, always will be here. This is your true home, your eternal home." As they closed in around me, as cold, dead hands reached for my flesh, I finally understood. This house, this family, they were never real. Or maybe they were too real. The dark truth behind the happy memories I'd clung to for so long. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the end. But instead of pain, I felt a rush of cool air on my face. When I opened my eyes, I was standing on the sidewalk again, staring up at 42 Willow Street. The for sale sign creaked in the wind, the house silent and still. For a moment, I wondered if it had all been a vivid hallucination, a waking nightmare born from the stress of revisiting painful childhood memories. But as I turned to leave, movement in an upstairs window caught my eye. A small boy stood there, his face pressed against the glass. My face, from all those years ago. He smiled and waved, beckoning me to come inside. "Come home," I ran. Ran until my lungs burned and my legs ached. Ran until 42 Willow Street was far behind me. But even now, years later, I know the truth. A part of me is still in that house, still 10 years old, still waiting. And someday I'll have to go back. Someday I'll have to face what's waiting for me in the attic. Because you can never truly escape your childhood home. It lives inside you, for better or worse. Forever. Story 19. The first call came on a Tuesday afternoon, right as I was settling in for a late lunch at my desk. I nearly ignored it, but some nagging instinct made me pick up the phone. Hello, is this Daniel Morrison? The voice was pleasant, professional. Your typical telemarketer. Yes, this is Dan, I replied, already reaching for the end call button. Great, I'm calling about an exciting new opportunity that I think you'll be very interested in. Dan, do you have a moment to talk about your future? I sighed, prepared to give my usual polite brush off. But then the caller said something that made my blood run cold. I'm sure you'd rather be enjoying that turkey sandwich in peace. Mayo, no mustard. Just how your mum used to make it, right? My hand froze halfway to my mouth, the sandwich forgotten. I'm sorry, what did you just say? A soft chuckle came through the line. Oh, Dan. Always so forgetful. We've talked about this before, remember? I know everything about you. It's my job to know. I ended the call, my heart pounding. It had to be a coincidence. Maybe I'd mentioned my lunch preferences on social media or something. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. For the rest of the day, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time my phone rang, I jumped. But there were no more strange calls. By the time I left work, I'd almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Almost. The next morning, my phone rang just as I was stepping out of the shower. Unknown number, just like yesterday. I let it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. I played the message as I got dressed. Good morning, Dan. I hope you slept well. Though I noticed you tossed and turned quite a bit around 2 a.m. Still having those nightmares about the accident. It wasn't your fault, you know. Sarah wouldn't want you to blame yourself. The phone slipped from my numb fingers, clattering to the floor. Sarah, my wife, dead 3 years now in a car crash I'd walked away from without a scratch. I'd never told anyone about the nightmares. With shaking hands, I picked up the phone and dialed the number back. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then, that same pleasant voice answered. Dan, I'm so glad you called back. Are you ready to hear about our offer? Who are you? I demanded, my voice cracking. How do you know these things about me? Now, Dan, there's no need to get upset. I told you, it's my job to know. I know everything about you. Your hopes, your fears, your deepest secrets. Even the ones you keep from yourself. I ended the call, feeling sick to my stomach. This wasn't possible. It had to be some kind of sick joke, or maybe I was losing my mind. I called in sick to work, spend the day pacing my apartment, jumping at every sound. The phone rang several times, but I let them all go to voicemail. Each message was more personal, more impossible than the last. Dan, I wish you'd pick up. We really need to talk about that thing in your basement. You know, the one you've been trying to forget about. Your mother's birthday is coming up. I'm sure she'd love to hear from you. It's been, 10 years since you last spoke? Since that fight about Sarah. Remember that summer camp when you were 12? The one you never told anyone about? I know what happened, Dan. I know what you did. By nightfall, I was a wreck. I unplugged my landline, turned off my cell phone, even disconnected the internet. Anything to stop the calls, to stop that voice that knew too much. In the sudden silence of my apartment, I could hear my own ragged breathing, the pounding of my heart, and underneath it all, a faint, persistent ringing. I shook my head, trying to clear it. There was no phone ringing. I'd disconnected everything. It was just my imagination, my frayed nerves playing tricks on me. But the ringing grew louder, more insistent. It seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. I clapped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The sound was inside my head. And then, cutting through the ringing, that voice, no longer coming from a phone, but surrounding me, filling the room. "Oh, Dan, did you really think you could shut me out so easily? I'm not just a voice on the phone. I'm a part of you. The part you've been trying to ignore for so long." I spun around, looking for the source of the voice. But I was alone in my apartment, alone with that voice that knew too much. "What do you want from me?" I shouted, my own voice sounding thin and scared in comparison. "I told you, Dan. I have an offer for you. A chance to make things right. To fix all the mistakes you've made." As the voice spoke, the room around me began to change. The walls seemed to melt away, revealing scenes from my past. There was Sarah, beautiful and alive, smiling at me from across a candlelit table. My mother, her face lined with disappointment as I stormed out of her house. A young boy, me, huddled in a dark cabin, tears streaming down his face. "You can change it all, Dan," the voice whispered, now seeming to come from inside my own head. "You can rewrite your story. All you have to do is say yes." I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the visions. But they were there, even behind my eyelids, memories I'd suppressed for years bubbling to the surface. "This isn't real," I muttered, pressing my palms against my temples. "You're not real. This is all in my head." A soft laugh echoed through my mind. "Of course it's in your head, Dan. That's where I live. In the darkest corners of your psyche. In the memories you try to forget. In the guilt you carry every day." I felt a presence behind me, a cold breath on the back of my neck. Slowly, I turned around. There, standing in my living room, was me. But not me as I am now. This was the me I could have been, should have been. Confident, successful, happy. Sarah stood beside him, very much alive, her hand resting on a swollen, pregnant belly. "This could be your reality, Dan," my doppelganger said, his voice that same telemarketer's pitch. "All you have to do is take my hand. Accept the offer." I stared at this perfect version of myself, at the life I could have had. My hand reached out, almost of its own accord. "That's it," the other me encouraged. "Just say yes. Say yes and all of this can be yours." My fingers were inches from his. I could almost feel the warmth of Sarah's smile, could almost hear the laughter of the child we'd never had. But then I saw his eyes, my eyes, and in their depths, I saw something ancient and hungry. Something that had worn my face, used my memories, but was fundamentally not me. I yanked my hand back, stumbling away. "No," I gasped. "No, this isn't real. You're not real." The other Mez face contorted with rage, the mask of perfection slipping to reveal something monstrous underneath. "You fool." It snarled, its voice no longer mine but a chorus of 1,000 screaming souls. "Do you have any idea what you're turning down?" The apartment began to shake, the visions of my past shattering like glass. I fell to my knees, covering my ears against the cacophony of ringing phones and screaming voices. "This isn't over, Dan," the thing that wasn't me hissed. "I'll be back. And next time, you won't be able to say no." And then, silence. I opened my eyes to find myself on the floor of my ordinary, unchanged apartment. My phone lay nearby, Its screen cracked from where I'd dropped it that morning. As I stared at it, it buzzed with a new text message. Unknown number. Thank you for your time, Mr. Morrison. We'll be in touch again soon about our offer. Have a nice day. I let out a shaky laugh that was half sob, because I knew, deep down, that this wasn't over. The telemarketer, that thing wearing my face and memories, would call again and again and again. And one day, I might not be strong enough to say no. So now, every time my phone rings, I hesitate. Every unknown number could be a harmless sales call, or it could be that voice, that offer, that glimpse of a perfect life that's almost, but not quite, mine. And each time, I have to choose between the imperfect reality I know and the perfect illusion that something dark and hungry is offering me. The phone is ringing now. Unknown number. Do I answer? Story 20. I jerked awake to the screech of brakes and the sickly yellow glow of unfamiliar streetlights. For a moment, I was completely disoriented. The last thing I remembered was boarding the 11:45 p.m. bus home after a late shift at the hospital. Now, as I peered out the grimy window, I found myself staring at a landscape I didn't recognize. Final stop, the driver called out, his voice oddly muffled. Everybody off. I blinked, trying to clear the fog from my brain. This couldn't be right. My stop was only 20 minutes from the hospital, and I'd been on this route 100 times before. Excuse me, I said, stumbling to the front of the empty bus. I think there's been a mistake. This isn't my stop. The driver turned to face me, and I had to stifle a gasp. His face was wrong, somehow. Too pale, too smooth, like a mannequin's. His eyes, when they met mine, were completely black. No mistake, he said, his lips barely moving. This is where you're meant to be, Sarah. End of the line. A chill ran down my spine. I never told him my name. I don't understand, I said, backing away. Where are we? How do you know my name? He smiled, and I saw that his teeth were just a bit too sharp. All will be clear soon. But for now, you need to get off the bus. They're waiting for you. As if on cue, the bus doors hissed open. A gust of cold air rushed in, carrying with it a scent I couldn't quite place. Something old and musty, like decaying leaves and stagnant water. Go on, the driver urged, his black eyes never blinking. Your journey's just beginning. Every instinct screamed at me to stay on the bus, to demand he take me back. But my body seemed to move of its own accord, carrying me down the steps and onto the deserted street. The moment my feet touched the pavement, the bus doors slammed shut. I whirled around, pounding on the glass, but the driver just gave me that unsettling smile as the bus pulled away. Within seconds, it had vanished into the fog that was rapidly closing in around me. I was alone on a street I didn't recognize, in a town that shouldn't exist. The buildings loomed over me, their architecture a bizarre mix of styles that hurt my eyes if I looked too closely. Victorian mansions stood next to sleek modern skyscrapers, while what looked like ancient Greek temples crowded the corners. And it was quiet. So quiet I could hear my own heartbeat, too fast and too loud in the stillness. Hello, I called out, my voice sounding thin and scared. Is anyone there? I need help. Oh, we're here, Sarah, a voice responded, seeming to come from everywhere at once. We've been waiting for you. A figure emerged from the fog. As it drew closer, I realized with a jolt that I recognized him. It was Mr. Johnson, my 8th grade math teacher who'd died of a heart attack. When I was in high school, Mr. Johnson, I whispered, disbelief warring with growing terror. But you're dead, he finished, smiling in a way that didn't reach his eyes. Yes, I suppose I am. But then again, so are you, or you will be. It's all a bit confusing at first. Another figure appeared beside him. My grandmother, who'd passed away when I was 10. Then another, a patient I'd lost on the operating table just last week. More and more people emerged from the fog. Faces I recognized from different parts of my life. Some living, some dead, all wearing the same unsettling smile. "What is this place?" I asked, my voice shaking. "What's happening to me?" Mr. Johnson stepped forward, placing a hand on my shoulder. His touch was ice cold. "This is the in-between, Sarah. A place where past, present, and future collide. Where the lines between life and death blur." "But I'm not dead," I protested. "I can't be. I was just on the bus, heading home." "Ah, yes. The bus," my grandmother chimed in, her voice carrying an echo it never had in life. "It's always a bus, or a train, or some form of transit. The journey from one state of being to another." My head was spinning. This couldn't be real. It had to be a dream, a hallucination brought on by too many night shifts and too little sleep. "I want to go home," I said, hating how small and scared I sounded. "Please, just let me go home." The crowd parted, revealing a door standing alone in the middle of the street. It was my front door, right down to the chipped blue paint and the brass knocker, shaped like a lion's head. "You can go home, Sarah," Mr. Johnson said. "All you have to do is walk through that door. But I must warn you, the home you return to may not be the one you left." I took a step towards the door, then hesitated. "What do you mean? What's on the other side?" "That depends on you," my grandmother said. "On the choices you've made, the paths you've taken, on the life you've lived, or the one you've yet to live." As she spoke, I noticed something odd. The people around me were changing, aging, daging, shifting in and out of focus like a badly tuned TV. I saw Mr. Johnson as a young man, then as a withered corpse. My grandmother flickered between the elderly woman I remembered and a vibrant young girl, and then I saw myself, dozens of versions of me, at different ages, in different clothes, with different lives etched on their faces. I saw a version of me that had never gone to medical school, another that had 3 kids and a wedding ring. I saw myself, old and frail, and young and full of life. "You stand at a crossroads, Sarah," a voice said. I turned to see the bus driver, his black eyes reflecting the swirling chaos around us. "Every choice you've ever made, and every choice you've yet to make, they all converge here, in the in-between." "But why me?" I asked. "Why now?" He smiled, and for a moment, his face flickered, revealing something ancient and unknowable beneath. "Why not you? Why not now? Time is an illusion here. You've always been here, and you've never been here at all." My head was pounding, the world around me shifting and blurring. I couldn't tell what was real anymore, couldn't distinguish memory from possibility. "You have a choice to make, Sarah, Mr. Johnson said, his voice sounding distant now. "You can go through that door, back to your life, or you can stay here in the in-between. Learn the secrets of existence, see the tapestry of time in all its glory. But choose wisely," my grandmother added. "For once you've seen beyond the veil, you can never truly go back. You'll always know, always remember." I looked at the door, my door, standing alone in the surreal landscape. Then I looked at the swirling mass of possibilities around me, at all the lives I could have lived, might still live. "What happens if I stay?" I asked. The bus driver's smile widened, revealing too many teeth. You become like us, a guardian of the in-between, a whisper in the ears of the living, a guide for the soon-to-be-dead. You'll ride the night bus forever, collecting souls and possibilities. I closed my eyes, trying to think. Was this real? Was any of it real? Or was I still on that bus, dreaming a strange and terrible dream? When I opened my eyes, I found myself alone. The crowd of familiar faces had vanished, leaving only the door and the bus driver. "Time to choose, Sarah," he said. "The night bus is waiting." I took a deep breath, my hand reaching for the doorknob. As my fingers closed around it, I heard the distant rumble of an engine, the hiss of hydraulic brakes. "Last call," the driver's voice echoed. "All aboard for the in-between." I turned the knob, and as the door swung open, as light spilled out from whatever lay beyond, I made my choice. For better or worse, I stepped forward, into the unknown, into possibility. The door closed behind me with a final, echoing click. And somewhere in the distance, I heard the night bus pull away, carrying its impossible passengers to the next stop on its endless route. Where it stops next, only time will tell. But somewhere out there, in the liminal spaces between what is and what could be, the night bus is always running, always waiting for its next passenger, always ready to take you on a journey you'll never forget. If you're brave enough to stay awake until the final stop,